Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Guest. Troy Kellerman stood at his kitchen window, watching his 9-year-old son Cooper kick a soccer ball around their backyard. The Saturday afternoon sun cast long shadows across their pristine lawn in the suburban neighborhood of Millbrook Heights. Troy had worked hard for this life. The 2-story colonial house, the manicured lawn, the white picket fence that seemed to promise the American dream. His security consulting business had flourished over the past 5 years, built on the foundation of discipline and tactical expertise he'd gained during his 8 years in Special Forces. The doorbell's chime interrupted his thoughts. Cooper's ball rolled to a stop as the boy looked toward the house with curious eyes. Troy dried his hands on a dish towel and headed to the front door, his military-trained instincts automatically cataloging the details of the stranger standing on his porch. The man was tall, roughly Troy's height at 6'2", with dirty blonde hair and weathered hands that spoke of manual labor. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and his smile seemed genuine enough, but something about his posture suggested a nervous energy barely contained beneath the surface. "Afternoon," the stranger said, extending his hand. "Name's Wade Hartley. Just moved into the house 3 doors down, the blue colonial. Thought I'd come by and introduce myself to the neighbors." Troy was about to respond when Cooper appeared in the doorway behind him. The boy took one look at Wade and froze, his face draining of color. Cooper had always been a social child, quick to warm up to new people, but now he pressed himself against Troy's leg with an urgency that immediately put Troy on alert. "Daddy," Cooper's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with an emotion Troy couldn't quite identify. "Tell him to leave." Troy frowned, glancing down at his son before looking back at Wade. "Cooper, that's not polite. Mr. Hartley is our new neighbor." But Cooper's reaction only intensified. His small hands clutched at Troy's jeans, and when Wade stepped closer with his hands still extended, the boy's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, ask him where he lived before," Cooper said, his voice breaking with the kind of desperation that made Troy's protective instincts flare to life. Before Troy could process his son's strange behavior, footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them. Brenna emerged from their bedroom, probably drawn by the voices. She'd been taking one of her frequent afternoon naps, something that had become a pattern over the past year. Her auburn hair was disheveled, and she wore the silk robe Troy had bought her for their 10th anniversary. The moment Brenna saw Wade, she stopped dead in her tracks. The color drained from her face so completely that Troy thought she might faint. Her green eyes went wide with what looked like terror, and her hand flew to her throat in a gesture that seemed involuntary. "Brenna?" Troy's voice carried an edge of concern mixed with growing suspicion. "You okay, honey?" Wade's nervous smile faltered for just a moment as he looked between Brenna and Troy, but he quickly recovered. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle anyone. Like I said, just wanted to introduce myself. Wade Hartley." He gestured vaguely toward the street, the blue house with the black shutters. Brenna's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. Cooper pressed even closer to Troy, and the boy's obvious distress was beginning to trigger every alarm bell in Troy's mind. In his military days, he'd learned to trust his gut, and right now, his gut was screaming that something was very, very wrong. "Where did you live before?" Troy asked, his tone casual, but his eyes locked on Wade's face. For the briefest moment, less than a second, Wade's expression shifted. It was so quick that most people would have missed it, but Troy had been trained to read micro-expressions, to catch the tiny tells that separated truth from deception. What he saw in that fleeting instant was panic, quickly masked by practiced ease. "Phoenix," Wade said smoothly. "Been there about 3 years. Before that, bounced around a lot with work. Construction and contracting, you know how it is." But Cooper shook his head violently. "No," the boy whispered, tears now streaming down his cheeks. "No, Daddy. He lived. Cooper, enough." Brenna's voice cracked like a whip, sharp and harsh in a way that made both Troy and Wade turn to look at her. She stepped forward, her face flushed now instead of pale, and placed a protective hand on Cooper's shoulder. "Go to your room. Now." The boy looked between his parents with confusion and fear, but Troy nodded toward the stairs. "Go ahead, buddy. We'll talk in a minute." Cooper reluctantly trudged upstairs, casting one last fearful glance at Wade before disappearing around the corner. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken tensions. Wade cleared his throat. "Kids, right? Sometimes they get confused about faces. Happens all the time." But his laugh sounded forced, and Troy noticed how his hands had formed loose fists at his sides. "Right," Troy said slowly, his analytical mind already working through the possibilities. His son's reaction, his wife's obvious recognition of this man, the way Wade's story didn't quite ring true. It all pointed to something that made Troy's jaw clench with barely controlled anger. Brenna had recovered some of her composure, but Troy could see the tremor in her hands as she smoothed down her robe. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Mr. Hartley," she said, her voice artificially bright. "I'm sure we'll see you around the neighborhood." It was clearly a dismissal, but Wade seemed reluctant to leave. His eyes lingered on Brenna for a moment too long, and Troy caught the brief, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a warning gesture that confirmed every suspicion now forming in his mind. "Absolutely," Wade said finally. "I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other. Looking forward to being part of the community." He stepped back from the doorway but paused, looking directly at Brenna. "Maybe we'll run into each other at the grocery store or something. Catch up on old times." The phrase hung in the air like a threat, and Troy felt something cold and dangerous settle in his chest. This wasn't a chance encounter. This wasn't a coincidental move to their neighborhood. Wade Hartley had come here deliberately, and from the looks that had passed between him and Brenna, Troy was beginning to understand why. After Wade left, walking with deliberate casualness toward his car, Troy closed the door and turned to face his wife. Brenna was already backing toward the stairs, her face pale again and her eyes darting everywhere except toward Troy's face. "Brenna," Troy said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded a storm. "We need to talk." Chapter 2. Unraveling Truths. Troy watched his wife pace their bedroom like a caged animal, her hands shaking as she lit her third cigarette in 10 minutes. She'd quit smoking 2 years ago, or so she'd claimed, but the pack of Marlboros had appeared from the depths of her jewelry box with practiced ease. "His name is Wade Hartley," Troy said, settling into the chair by their window. His voice remained calm, controlled, the same tone he'd used during interrogations in Afghanistan. "He says he's from Phoenix. Says he's in construction." He paused, watching Brenna's reaction. "But you already knew all that, didn't you?" Brenna took a long drag and exhaled slowly, the smoke creating a barrier between them. "I don't know what you're talking about." Our son recognized him. A 9-year-old boy who's never been to Phoenix, who's barely been outside of Connecticut, somehow knows our new neighbor well enough to be terrified of him. Troy's hands remained relaxed in his lap, but his eyes never left her face. "So, I'll ask again, how do you know Wade Hartley?" The cigarette trembled between her fingers. "Maybe Cooper saw him around town before. Kids notice things." Troy had spent 13 years with Brenna, from her college days at UConn through courtship, marriage, and Cooper's birth. He knew every one of her tells. The way she touched her neck when nervous, how she couldn't maintain eye contact when lying, the slight Connecticut accent that crept into her voice when she was under pressure. "Try again," he said quietly. Brenna's composure finally cracked. She sank onto the edge of their bed, her head in her hands. "Troy, please, can't we just let this go? He's here now, but that doesn't mean anything has to change." The admission hit him like a physical blow, even though he'd been expecting it. Troy had built his business on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves, to stay 3 steps ahead of any threat. But somehow his own wife had been playing a game he hadn't even known existed. "How long?" The question came out flat, emotionless. "It's over," Brenna said quickly. "Whatever you're thinking, it's over. It has been for months." "How long?" She looked up at him then, and he saw something in her eyes that he'd never seen before. Not just guilt, but defiance. As if part of her resented having to explain herself to him. 18 months, she whispered. Troy processed this information with the same methodical approach he used for tactical planning. 18 months ago, Brenna had started working late more often, started taking those afternoon naps, started suggesting that Cooper spend more weekends at her mother's house. All of it made sense now. Where did you meet him? Troy, please. Where? The gym. She took another drag, her hands steadier now. He was working on the renovation project at Fit First. We started talking. Fit First was Brenna's upscale gym downtown, the one where she spent 3 hours every Tuesday and Thursday. Troy had encouraged her membership, thinking the exercise was helping with her postpartum depression that had lingered long after Cooper's birth. He'd even been proud of how dedicated she'd become to her fitness routine. And Cooper knows him because Brenna's silence stretched for nearly a minute before she answered. Wade came to a few of Cooper's soccer games. I told Cooper he was a friend from work. The betrayal cut deeper than Troy had expected. Not just the affair, but the way she'd involved their son. Made Cooper complicit in her lies. Made the boy shake hands with his mother's lover and pretend everything was normal. Why did he move here? Troy asked. I don't know, but her voice lacked conviction. Troy stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. He walked to their bedroom window and looked out at the neighborhood he'd worked so hard to afford. The tree-lined streets, the well-maintained homes, the promise of security and stability he'd wanted to provide for his family. You're lying, he said without turning around. Wade Hartley didn't randomly choose Millbrook Heights. He didn't randomly choose a house 3 doors down from us. He came here for a reason. Behind him, he heard the bed creak as Brenna stood up. Troy, I swear to you, I had no idea he was moving here. When I ended things with him 6 months ago, I thought that was it. I thought he understood. Now Troy turned around, and Brenna took an involuntary step backward at whatever she saw in his expression. 6 months ago, but you said 18 months total. The affair lasted about a year, she said quickly. I ended it 6 months ago when I realized what I was doing to our family. To Cooper. To you. But he didn't want it to end. Brenna's cigarette had burned down to the filter without her noticing. She stubbed it out in the ashtray she'd hidden in her nightstand drawer, another small deception that added to the growing pile. He said he loved me, she whispered, so we belonged together. But I told him it was over. I chose my family. Troy's laugh was completely devoid of humor. You chose your family. After a year of fucking another man, you chose your family. He shook his head. How generous of you, Brenna. Troy, please. Does he know about Cooper's soccer schedule? About my business trips? About which nights I work late at the office? The color drained from her face again. What kind of question is that? The kind of question a man asks when he realizes his wife has been sharing details about their family with someone who might not have the best intentions. Troy's voice remained level, but there was something underneath now. Something cold and calculating that made Brenna wrap her arms around herself. Wade wouldn't hurt us, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. A man who starts an affair with a married woman, then moves 3 doors down from her family when she ends it? Troy moved closer, and Brenna instinctively backed toward the door. That's not the behavior of someone who's accepted rejection, Brenna. That's the behavior of someone who's escalating. Troy had seen enough obsessive behavior during his military service and his security consulting work to recognize the pattern. Wade Hartley hadn't moved to Millbrook Heights to start fresh. He'd moved here to continue something that Brenna thought she'd ended. I need you to pack a bag, Troy said suddenly. You and Cooper are going to stay at your mother's for a few days. What? What? Because I need time to think. And because until I figure out what Wade Hartley really wants, I don't want you or Cooper in this house. Brenna's defiance flared again. You can't just kick us out of our own home. Troy looked at her for a long moment. This woman he'd loved since they were 22 years old. The woman who'd promised to be faithful to him. The woman who'd built a double life so elaborate that she'd convinced their son to lie for her. Watch me, he said quietly. As Brenna stormed out to pack, Troy remained by the window, his mind already working through possibilities. Wade Hartley thought he was dealing with an unsuspecting husband who could be manipulated or intimidated. He thought he was playing a game where he held all the cards. But Troy Kellerman hadn't survived 8 years in special forces by being anyone's victim. And he hadn't built a successful security business by backing down from threats. Wade Hartley had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And Troy was going to make sure he paid for it. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Preparation. Troy stood in his basement office, surrounded by the tools of his trade. 3 monitors displayed different search results, police databases, and social media profiles. His military training had taught him that information was the most powerful weapon. And after 48 hours of digging, he was beginning to understand exactly what kind of man had decided to insert himself into the Kellerman family. Wade Hartley, age 34, had been born in Tucson, Arizona. High school dropout at 16. Military service, Army, dishonorably discharged after 2 years for assault charges that had been quietly buried. Since then, a string of construction jobs across the Southwest, never staying in one place for more than 18 months. 3 restraining orders from 3 different women in 3 different states. The pattern was clear. Wade was a predator who specialized in married women. He would insert himself into their lives, usually through work or social connections, then gradually isolate them from their support systems. When the women tried to end the relationships, Wade would escalate, following them, harassing them, sometimes moving to be closer to them. But Brenna had been different. She'd had something the others hadn't, a husband with the skills to fight back. Troy's phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "Cooper's asking when we can come home. What should I tell him?" Troy typed back, "Tell him Daddy's working on a surprise for the family. Be patient." It wasn't entirely a lie. Troy was working on something for the family. He was working on eliminating the threat that had taken up residence 3 doors down. The doorbell rang upstairs, and Troy checked his security monitors. Wade Hartley stood on his front porch, holding a bottle of wine and wearing what he probably thought was a friendly smile. Troy almost admired the man's audacity. Troy climbed the stairs and opened the door, making sure to appear slightly disheveled and emotionally drained. Exactly what Wade would expect from a man whose wife had just left him. "Wade," Troy said, injecting just the right note of weary resignation into his voice. "What can I do for you?" Wade held up the wine bottle. "Thought you might need some company. Saw Brenna and Cooper leaving with suitcases yesterday. Figured you might be going through a rough patch." The pretense of neighborly concern was almost insulting, but Troy played along. "Yeah, we're having some problems. She took Cooper to her mother's for a few days while we figure things out." Wade's eyes lit up with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Sorry to hear that, man. Marriage is tough. Mind if I come in? Maybe we can talk about it." Troy stepped aside, gesturing Wade into his living room. This was perfect. Wade was making it easy by coming to him. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Beer." "Beer sound great." Troy retrieved 2 bottles from the kitchen, making sure to keep Wade in sight through the pass-through window. When he returned, Wade was studying the family photos on the mantelpiece, particularly the ones of Brenna. "Beautiful woman," Wade said, accepting his beer. "Beautiful family. You're a lucky man." "I thought so." Troy settled into his recliner, keeping his body language open and non-threatening. But apparently luck runs out. Wade sat on the couch, directly across from Troy. He was trying to appear casual, but Troy noticed how his eyes kept scanning the room, cataloging exits and potential weapons. Military training, even abbreviated training, left marks. "You want to talk about what happened?" Wade asked. Sometimes it helps to get a man's perspective. Troy almost smiled at the irony. "She's been having an affair. Found out a couple days ago." He took a long pull of his beer, watching Wade's reaction over the rim of the bottle. Wade's expression was a masterclass in false sympathy. "Damn, that's rough. How'd you find out?" "Phone records. Credit card statements. You know how it is. Once you start looking, the evidence is everywhere." Troy shook his head. 18 months. A whole year and a half of my life was a lie. "Did she say who it was?" Now, Troy did smile, but it was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Some guy from her gym. Said his name was Wade." The beer bottle froze halfway to Wade's lips. For just a moment, his mask slipped completely, and Troy saw the real man underneath. Calculating, dangerous, and now uncertain about how much Troy actually knew. "Common name," Wade said carefully. Very common. Made it hard to track him down at first. Troy leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a conversational tone. But I'm pretty good at finding people. It's what I do for a living. Wade set his beer down on the coffee table, and Troy noticed the slight tremor in his hands. What kind of work do you do? Security consulting, risk assessment, background investigations. Troy's smile widened. I help people identify threats before they become problems. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Wade was clearly trying to decide whether Troy was playing games or genuinely didn't know who he was talking to. Troy let him wonder. So what are you going to do? Wade asked finally. About my marriage? Or about the man who destroyed it? Your marriage. Troy stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Wade's house. Well, that depends on what this Wade character does next. See, Brenna says the affair is over. Says she chose her family. But I'm wondering if old Wade got the message. Behind him, Troy heard Wade shift on the couch. What do you mean? Troy turned around, and this time he let Wade see exactly what kind of man he was dealing with. The friendly neighbor facade was gone, replaced by something harder and infinitely more dangerous. I mean that if some piece of shit thinks he can walk into my life, fuck my wife, corrupt my son, and then stick around to see what else he can take from me. Troy's voice remained calm, almost conversational. Well, that would be a very serious miscalculation on his part. Wade stood up slowly, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket before he caught himself. Troy, I think maybe I should go. You know what's interesting about background investigations? Troy continued, as if Wade hadn't spoken. The things you can learn about a person with just a little bit of effort. Employment history, criminal records, patterns of behavior. Wade's face had gone pale. What are you saying? I'm saying that any man who would move 3 doors down from a woman who's rejected him, that's not normal behavior, Wade. That's predatory behavior. And in my experience, predators don't stop escalating until someone makes them stop. Wade backed toward the door, but Troy didn't move to block his path. He didn't need to. The message had been delivered. I think there's been a misunderstanding, Wade said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. No misunderstanding at all, Troy replied. You moved here because you thought you were dealing with some suburban dad who wouldn't fight back. You thought you could intimidate me into giving up my family. Troy's smile was cold as winter. But here's what you didn't count on, Wade. I'm not some civilian who's going to roll over for you. Wade reached the door and fumbled with the handle. I'm just your neighbor, man. I don't know what you think. Wade, Troy's voice cut through the other man's protests like a blade. Pack your shit and leave town. Tonight. Because if you're still in that house tomorrow morning, I'm going to start treating you like the threat you actually are. Wade fled without another word, practically running across the yard to his house. Troy watched through the window as lights came on throughout Wade's house, seeing the man's silhouette moving frantically from room to room. Troy pulled out his phone and called his old Army buddy, Derek Rodriguez, who now ran a private security firm in Hartford. Derek, it's Troy. I need a favor. How quickly can you get a surveillance team on a house in Millbrook Heights? Full coverage, 24/7. What kind of trouble are you in, brother? Troy watched Wade, loading boxes into his truck under the cover of darkness. The kind that requires professional attention. And Derek? Make sure your guys are armed. Because Troy had been serious about his threat. If Wade Hartley was still there in the morning, Troy was going to stop treating this like a domestic dispute and start treating it like a war. And in war, Troy Kellerman had never lost. Chapter 4. The trap is set. Wade Hartley was still there in the morning. Troy watched from his kitchen window as Wade loaded landscaping equipment from his truck, making a show of beginning work on his front yard. The message was clear. Wade wasn't intimidated. He wasn't leaving. If anything, he was doubling down on his presence in the neighborhood. Derek's surveillance team had confirmed Troy's suspicions throughout the night. Wade had loaded boxes into his truck around midnight, but had never left the property. Instead, he'd unloaded everything before dawn and had spent the early morning hours making obvious preparations to stay. It was a calculated move designed to show Troy that threats wouldn't work. Wade Hartley had just made his second major mistake. Troy's phone rang, and Derek's voice crackled through the speaker. Your boys got company. Black sedan, 2 occupants, been parked at the end of the street for the past hour. They're watching his house. Can you give me plates? Already ran them. Rental car, paid for with a credit card belonging to Marcus Vega. Troy's blood ran cold. Marcus Vega was a name from Wade's military file, another dishonorably discharged soldier who'd served time for assault and intimidation. If Wade was calling in backup, the situation had just escalated beyond a simple stalking case. "How many men can you get me?" Troy asked. "For what kind of operation?" Troy considered his words carefully. Derek was a good friend, but he was also a legitimate businessman who couldn't afford to be associated with anything that crossed certain lines. The kind where everyone goes home safe, but the problem gets permanently resolved. Derek was quiet for a long moment. "Troy, you know I can't." "Then just maintain surveillance and stay ready to call the cops if things go sideways." Troy ended the call and immediately dialed another number. "Vinny? It's Troy Kellerman. I need to call in that favor." Vincent Torino was not a friend in any conventional sense. He was a former Special Forces operator who'd gone into business for himself after discharge, providing services that legitimate security companies couldn't offer. Troy had helped Vinny out of a jam with some drug dealers in Hartford 2 years ago, and Vinny had promised that the debt would be repaid when needed. "Troy, my friend, what can I do for you? I need someone to disappear. Permanently. But it has to look accidental." Vinny chuckled. "How permanently?" "Enough to send a message to anyone else who might be thinking about threatening my family." "This about the guy who's been fucking your wife?" Troy should have been surprised that Vinny already knew, but information was currency in Vinny's world. Him and whoever he's brought with him. 2 for 1. That's gonna cost extra. Money's not an issue. It never is with you, brother. Give me 12 hours to set it up. And Troy, maybe take your family somewhere nice for the weekend. Somewhere with good alibis. After ending the call, Troy walked upstairs to his home office and began making arrangements. Brenna and Cooper would need to stay at her mother's for at least another week, maybe longer. His business had a legitimate consulting contract in Boston that would provide perfect cover for his absence when everything went down. But first, he needed to accelerate Wade's timeline. Troy dressed in his running gear and headed outside for his usual morning jog. As he stretched on his front lawn, he made sure to wave at Wade, who was installing a new mailbox with deliberate, exaggerated care. "Beautiful morning," Troy called out cheerfully. Wade looked up, clearly confused by Troy's sudden change in demeanor. "Yeah, it is." Troy jogged over, maintaining his friendly neighbor facade. "Listen, I wanted to apologize for last night. I was pretty drunk, and I think I might have said some things that didn't make much sense." Wade straightened up, his hand moving instinctively toward the hammer at his belt. "Don't worry about it, man. We all have rough nights. The thing is, Brenna told me she might know you from somewhere. Said she recognized your name, but couldn't place it." Troy stretched his hamstring, the picture of casual conversation. "You ever go to Fit First downtown? The gym on Harbor Street?" Wade's eyes narrowed. "Can't say I have." "Weird. She was sure she'd seen you there." Troy shrugged. "Oh well, probably just one of those faces. Anyway, I should get going. Got a big meeting in Boston this afternoon." Troy jogged away before Wade could respond, but he could feel the man's eyes burning into his back. The seed was planted. Wade now knew that Troy would be out of town, and he also knew that Brenna had been talking about him. Both pieces of information would drive Wade to make his next move faster than he'd originally planned. 3 blocks away, Troy stopped and called Vinny back. "Change of plans. Make it look like a breaking gone wrong. Tonight." "Tonight? That's awfully fast, even for me. The target just learned that I'll be out of town. He's going to move on my wife and son, probably within the next few hours. I need him taken care of before that happens." "What about the backup in the sedan?" Troy's smile was cold. "What about them? I like the way you think, brother. But that's definitely going to cost extra. Bill me." The rest of the morning passed in careful choreography. Troy made sure to be seen loading his overnight bag into his car, checking his watch, and generally appearing to be in a hurry to leave for his fabricated Boston meeting. Derek's surveillance team confirmed that Wade was watching from his front window, and the men in the sedan had positioned themselves with clear sight lines to both Troy's house and Wade's. At noon, Troy drove away with great fanfare, making sure to wave goodbye to Wade as he passed. But instead of heading toward the interstate, he drove to a storage facility on the other side of town, where he'd rented a unit under a false name 6 months earlier. Inside the unit was everything he'd need for the next 24 hours. camping gear, freeze-dried food, water, and most importantly, a complete change of clothes and documentation that would place him in Boston should anyone ask questions later. Troy settled in to wait. By his calculations, Wade would make his move sometime after dark. He'd probably try to break into Troy's house first, looking for information about Brenna's whereabouts or evidence of how much Troy actually knew about the affair. When he didn't find what he was looking for, he'd head to Brenna's mother's house. But Wade would never make it that far. Vinny's people were already in position. By tomorrow morning, Wade Hartley and his friend Marcus Vega would be nothing but a memory and a police report about a home invasion gone wrong. Troy's phone buzzed with a text from Brenna. "Cooper wants to know when you're coming to see him. He misses you." Troy stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Tell him Daddy's taking care of the bad man. We'll all be together soon." It wasn't a lie. By tomorrow, the threat to his family would be eliminated, and they could begin the process of rebuilding their lives. But first, Troy was going to make sure that Wade Hartley learned what happened when someone threatened what belonged to Troy Kellerman. The lesson would be permanent. Chapter 5, Blood and Consequences. The call came at 3:47 a.m. Troy jerked awake in his storage unit, instantly alert despite having dozed fitfully for only 2 hours. Vinny's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "We have a problem." Troy was already pulling on his boots. "What happened?" "Your boy Wade made his move around midnight, just like you predicted. But when my guys got to his house, they found something else entirely." "What kind of something else?" "The kind that involves federal fucking agents." Troy's blood turned to ice. "Say that again." "DEA had the place under surveillance. Turns out your wife's boyfriend wasn't just some stalker ex. He was running drugs through his construction business, using renovation contracts as cover for moving product. The feds have been watching him for months." Troy closed his eyes, his tactical mind immediately calculating the implications. If Wade was under federal surveillance, then every move Troy had made over the past 3 days was potentially on record. His conversations with Derek, his visit to Vinny, his staged departure for Boston, all of it could be evidence in a federal investigation. "Are your people clear?" "For now. We pulled back when we saw the surveillance van." "But Troy, there's more. Wade and his friend didn't just disappear into the night. They grabbed someone on their way out." "Who?" "Mrs. Chun from the house between yours and Wade's. Elderly Asian woman, lives alone. Looks like they needed a hostage for whatever they're planning next." Troy's jaw clenched. Helen Chun was a 73-year-old widow who brought Cooper cookies every Christmas and kept an eye on the house when Troy and Brenna went out of town. If Wade had escalated to kidnapping innocent neighbors, the situation had spiraled far beyond anything Troy had prepared for. "Where are they now?" "Unknown. But Troy, you need to get back here." The DEA found something else in Wade's house. Photos of your wife, your son, detailed surveillance notes about your family's routine. This guy wasn't just obsessed with Brenna. He was planning something big. Troy was already breaking down his temporary camp, his movements efficient and automatic. "I'm 20 minutes out. And Troy, come armed. Whatever Wade's planning, I don't think he's finished with your family." The drive back to Millbrook Heights passed in a blur of tactical planning and cold fury. Troy had dealt with hostage situations during his military service, but never when his own family was at the center of the threat matrix. Wade had crossed every line by involving Mrs. Chun, and now Troy was going to cross a few lines of his own. The neighborhood was a chaos of flashing lights when Troy arrived. DEA vehicles, local police cruisers, and ambulances lined the street. Derek intercepted him before he could reach his house. "Where the hell have you been?" Derek demanded. "The feds have been looking for you for 3 hours. Boston. I had a consulting meeting." Troy's story was rehearsed and backed by documentation, but he could see skepticism in Derek's eyes. "What's the situation?" "Wade's gone completely off the rails. After he grabbed Mrs. Chun, he called 911 and told them he had explosive devices planted in 3 houses on this street. Yours, his, and the Chun house. Bomb squad's been clearing the area while they search." Troy scanned the controlled chaos around them, his trained eye picking out the federal agents from the local cops. One man in particular caught his attention, a tall, lean agent with prematurely gray hair who was clearly running the operation. "That's Special Agent Morrison," Derek said, following Troy's gaze. He's been asking a lot of questions about your business, your military background, and your relationship with Wade. My relationship with Wade? I met the man 3 days ago. That's what I told him. But he seems to think there's more to the story. Before Troy could respond, Agent Morrison approached them. His expression was carefully neutral, but Troy recognized the look of a federal investigator who smelled something rotten. Mr. Kellerman? I'm Special Agent Morrison, DEA. I need to ask you some questions about Wade Hartley. Troy extended his hand. Of course, though I'm not sure how much help I can be. I barely knew the man. Morrison didn't shake his hand. Where were you tonight between midnight and 4 a.m.? Boston, the Marriott downtown. I can provide receipts if needed. We'll need to verify that. In the meantime, can you tell me about your conversation with Mr. Hartley yesterday morning? Troy's expression didn't change, but his mind was racing. If the DEA had audio surveillance on Wade's house, they might have recorded parts of their conversation. He needed to be very careful about how much he revealed. He came by with a bottle of wine. Said he wanted to be neighborly. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. What did you talk about? General stuff. The neighborhood. My family. He asked about my work. Morrison pulled out a small recorder. Mr. Kellerman, I'm going to play something for you. This is from a surveillance device we had placed in Mr. Hartley's residence. Wade's voice crackled through the speaker, distorted but audible. The husband knows. Kellerman figured out about me and Brenna. He's some kind of military contractor or something. Made threats about treating me like a threat. Morrison stopped the recording and looked at Troy. That doesn't sound like a neighborly conversation about the weather. Troy met his gaze steadily. Wade Hartley was having an affair with my wife. I confronted him about it and told him to stay away from my family. If that constitutes a threat in your book, Agent Morrison, then I'd suggest you haven't spent much time around men whose wives have been unfaithful. Did you threaten to kill him? I told him to leave town. When someone is stalking your family, Agent Morrison, you make it clear that their behavior won't be tolerated. Morrison studied Troy for a long moment. Mr. Kellerman, Wade Hartley has been under federal surveillance for the past 4 months as part of a drug trafficking investigation. During that time, we've documented increasingly erratic behavior focused on your wife and son. Photos, surveillance notes, purchases of weapons and surveillance equipment. Yesterday's conversation with you appears to have triggered a complete psychological break. Troy felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of break? The kind where he's barricaded himself and an elderly hostage in an abandoned warehouse on the east side, claiming to have enough explosives to level a city block. Morrison's voice was grim. He's demanding to speak with your wife. Says he wants to explain why he had to take drastic measures to protect her from you. The pieces of Wade's deranged plan finally clicked into place. In his twisted mind, Troy had become the villain, the abusive husband keeping Wade from his true love. Taking Mrs. Chun wasn't just a desperate move. It was Wade's attempt to force a confrontation that would end with Brenna choosing between her husband and an innocent woman's life. Where's my wife now? Safe. We've got her and your son in protective custody until this is resolved. Troy looked around at the organized chaos of the federal response. Bomb squads, SWAT teams, negotiators. All of it focused on containing a situation that had spiraled far beyond anyone's control. Agent Morrison, Troy said carefully, I think you should know that Wade Hartley isn't just having a psychological break. Based on what I observed yesterday, he's been planning this escalation for weeks, maybe months. The move to this neighborhood, the timing of everything, it's all been leading to this moment. Morrison's eyes narrowed. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that your standard hostage negotiation protocols aren't going to work here. Wade doesn't want money or safe passage. He wants my wife to validate his delusion that I'm the problem and he's the solution. And Troy met Morrison's gaze with the steady confidence of a man who'd faced impossible odds before. And I'm suggesting that maybe it's time to give him what he wants. Chapter 6, Into the Abyss. The abandoned Hartwell manufacturing warehouse squatted on the east side like a cancer, its broken windows and rust-stained walls testament to the industrial decline that had claimed this part of the city. Troy studied the building through binoculars from the DEA command post, noting the tactical challenges it presented. Multiple entry points, high ceiling that would complicate any assault, and too many places for Wade to hide with his hostage. Absolutely not, Agent Morrison said when Troy finished outlining his plan. You're a civilian, Mr. Kellerman. This is a federal operation. Troy lowered the binoculars and turned to face the federal agent. Agent Morrison, I spent 8 years in special forces conducting exactly these kinds of operations. I know building assault tactics better than most of your SWAT team. And more importantly, I'm the only person Wade Hartley wants to talk to. Wade wants to talk to your wife, not you. Wade wants to prove that he's the better man, that he can protect Brenna from the terrible husband who threatens innocent neighbors. Troy's voice was cold with calculation. He's not going to hurt Mrs. Chun as long as he thinks there's a chance to win this confrontation. But if your negotiators keep stalling, if he starts to realize that Brenna isn't coming, he's going to start making good on his threats about those explosives. Morrison consulted with his team leader, a conversation Troy couldn't hear but could read in their body language. The federal agents were out of options, and everyone knew it. Wade had been clear in his demands. Bring Brenna Kellerman to the warehouse, alone, or he would detonate the devices he claimed to have rigged throughout the building. Even if I agreed to this insane plan, Morrison said finally, what makes you think you can succeed where trained negotiators have failed? Troy picked up the tactical vest Derek had brought him from his storage unit. Because Wade Hartley thinks he's the hero of this story, Agent Morrison. He thinks he's rescuing a woman from an abusive husband and protecting her from a man who makes threats against innocent neighbors. Troy strapped on the vest with practiced efficiency. But when I walk into that warehouse, he's going to realize he's not the hero. He's not even the victim. He's just another predator who picked the wrong family to fuck with. The plan was simple, which made it both elegant and dangerous. Troy would approach the warehouse openly, wearing civilian clothes over his tactical vest. He would be wired for sound, but otherwise unarmed, at least visibly. Wade would see him coming and would make the natural assumption that Brenna had sent her husband instead of coming herself. What Wade wouldn't see was Derek's team positioned around the building's perimeter, or the federal agents ready to move on Troy's signal. He also wouldn't see the ceramic knife strapped to Troy's ankle, or the flashbang grenades disguised as cell phones in his jacket pockets. Remember, Morrison said as Troy prepared to leave the command post, we need Wade alive. He's got information about a drug network that spans 3 states. Troy's smile was sharp as a blade. I'll do my best. The walk to the warehouse felt like every patrol Troy had ever taken in hostile territory, hyper-aware of every shadow, every potential shooting position, every escape route. The building loomed larger as he approached, its broken windows like dead eyes watching his advance. Troy's earpiece crackled with Morrison's voice. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures on the 2nd floor, northwest corner. Wade's got Mrs. Chun in what looks like an office space. Troy clicked his radio twice to acknowledge and pushed through the warehouse's main entrance. The interior was a cavern of shadows and rust, broken machinery scattered across a concrete floor that echoed with every footstep. Graffiti covered the walls, and the smell of decay and neglect permeated everything. Wait, Troy called out, his voice carrying through the empty space. It's Troy Kellerman. Brenna sent me. Silence for nearly 30 seconds. Then Wade's voice drifted down from somewhere above. Where is she? I told them I wanted to talk to Brenna. She's scared, Wade. Scared of what this has become. Troy moved deeper into the warehouse, following a set of metal stairs toward the 2nd floor. She asked me to come instead, to hear what you have to say. She should be here herself. Wade's voice cracked with emotion and frustration. She needs to understand what you've done to us. Troy reached the 2nd floor landing and could see light spilling from a doorway at the far end of a corridor lined with abandoned offices. What I've done. Wade, I think we need to talk about what you've done. I protected her. I gave her what she needed when her own husband was too busy playing soldier to notice she was dying inside. Troy moved slowly down the corridor, his every sense alert for signs of explosives or booby traps. Through his earpiece, he could hear Morrison coordinating with the SWAT team, preparing for multiple entry points once Troy gave the signal. Is that what you told yourself? Troy called out. That you were protecting her? I loved her. The desperation in Wade's voice was unmistakable now. I love her. More than you ever could. Troy reached the doorway and could see into the office space. Wade stood near a broken window, his arm around Mrs. Chen's frail shoulders. The elderly woman was trembling, but appeared unharmed. Wade held a pistol in his free hand, but it was pointed toward the floor rather than at his hostage. More importantly, Troy could see the explosive devices Wade had rigged around the room. Crude but potentially effective pipe bombs connected by visible wiring to a dead man's switch in Wade's left hand. "Hello, Wade," Troy said, stepping into the doorway with his hands raised. "Mrs. Chen, are you all right?" The elderly woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay, Troy, but he says he's going to hurt people if Brenna doesn't come." "Brenna's not coming," Troy said, his eyes locked on Wade's face. "But I'm here, and I think it's time you and I had an honest conversation about what this is really about." Wade's grip tightened on both the pistol and the dead man's switch. "This is about love, Troy. Something you obviously don't understand." "Love." Troy stepped further into the room, calculating angles and distances. "Wade, let me tell you what I see. I see a man who stalked a married woman for 18 months. A man who manipulated her into an affair while she was dealing with postpartum depression. A man who involved her 9-year-old son in his deception. A man who moved 3 doors down from her family when she tried to end things." Troy's voice hardened. "That's not love, Wade. That's obsession. That's predatory behavior. You don't know anything." Wade's face flushed with anger. "You were never there for her. Always working, always traveling, always putting your business ahead of your family." "You're right," Troy said, and Wade blinked in surprise. "I wasn't there enough. I was building a business, trying to provide for my family, and I missed the signs that my wife was struggling. That's on me." Troy took another step closer. "But here's the difference between you and me, Wade. When I realized I'd failed my family, I tried to fix it. When you realized Brenna didn't want you anymore, you decided to take her by force." Wade's hand was shaking now, both from emotion and from the weight of the dead man's switch. "She does want me. She just doesn't understand that you're the problem." "Then why isn't she here, Wade?" Troy's voice was almost gentle now. "If she really wanted you, if she really believed I was the problem, why did she choose to stay with me instead of running away with you 6 months ago?" The question hit Wade like a physical blow. His face crumpled with the realization that his entire delusion was built on a foundation of wishful thinking and self-deception. "Because you threatened her," Wade whispered. "Because you made her afraid of what you'd do." Troy shook his head sadly. "No, Wade. Because she realized that what happened between you two wasn't love. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness that she regretted the moment it started getting serious." "You're lying. Ask Mrs. Chun," Troy said, nodding toward the elderly woman. "She sees everything that happens in our neighborhood. She's watched my family for years. Ask her if she's ever seen me raise my voice to my wife. Ask her if she's ever seen any signs that Brenna was afraid of me." Mrs. Chun looked between Troy and Wade, understanding what Troy was trying to do. "Brenna was never afraid of Troy," she said softly. "She was afraid of you. She told me you wouldn't leave her alone after she ended things." Wade's carefully constructed reality was crashing down around him, and Troy could see the exact moment when the man's last shred of self-control snapped. "No!" Wade screamed, raising the pistol toward Troy. But Troy had been ready for this moment since entering the warehouse. As Wade's hand came up, Troy was already moving, diving toward the window while simultaneously triggering the flashbang grenade in his jacket pocket. The explosion of light and sound disoriented everyone in the room, but Troy's military training had prepared him for the sensory overload. He rolled to his feet, drew the ceramic knife from his ankle, and was on Wade before the man could recover from the flashbang's effects. The knife went in just below Wade's ribs, angled upward toward his heart. Wade's eyes went wide with shock and pain, the pistol falling from nerveless fingers as he collapsed. "That's for threatening my family," Troy whispered in Wade's ear as the man's life ebbed away. Troy quickly checked Mrs. Chun, shaken but unharmed, and then carefully examined the dead man's switch. It was a simple pressure device that would detonate the explosives if released. Troy held it steady while calling for the bomb squad through his radio. "Target is down," he reported to Morrison. "Hostage is safe, but we still have active explosives in here." As federal agents flooded into the warehouse, Troy remained calm and professional, following all protocols for evidence preservation and hostage safety. To any observer, it looked like a textbook resolution to a hostage situation, a civilian who'd gotten lucky during a desperate struggle with an unstable kidnapper. Only Troy knew that there had been nothing lucky about it. Wade Hartley had finally learned what happened when someone threatened what belonged to Troy Kellerman. The lesson had been permanent. Chapter 7. Reckoning. 3 days after the warehouse incident, Troy sat in a sterile federal interview room, facing Agent Morrison across a metal table. The room was windowless and gray, designed to make suspects uncomfortable, but Troy had been in far worse places during his military service. He sipped black coffee from a foam cup and waited for Morrison to begin what he knew would be a carefully orchestrated interrogation. The knife wound was very precise, Morrison said, opening a thick file folder. One thrust, angled upward between the ribs, piercing the heart. That's the kind of wound you see from someone with combat training. Troy met Morrison's gaze steadily. Wade Hartley was pointing a gun at me and threatening to detonate explosives that could have killed Mrs. Chun and half your federal agents. I did what I had to do to protect innocent lives. Except the ME's report shows that Wade was stabbed from behind, not during a frontal struggle. The flashbang disoriented everyone in that room, Agent Morrison. I'm not sure anyone could reconstruct the exact sequence of events with complete accuracy. Morrison pulled out a photograph, a crime scene shot showing Wade's body positioned near the window. Wade's blood spatter pattern suggests he was facing away from you when a knife went in. That's not consistent with your statement about a struggle for the gun. Troy leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. Are you suggesting that I murdered Wade Hartley in cold blood, Agent Morrison? Because if that's your theory, I'd like to know what evidence you have beyond blood spatter analysis that could have multiple interpretations. Morrison stared at him for a long moment before pulling out another folder. Let's talk about Vincent Torino. Troy's expression didn't change, but he felt a familiar chill. Vinny was supposed to have stayed completely off the radar during this operation. Vincent Torino is a convicted felon who runs a questionable security company out of Hartford. Morrison continued. Phone records show that you called his number twice in the 24 hours before Wade's death. What did you discuss? Vincent Torino occasionally provides subcontractor services for my legitimate security consulting business. I called him about a potential job in Boston. A job that never materialized. Not all business inquiries result in contracts, Agent Morrison. Morrison opened the second folder and spread several surveillance photos across the table. The images showed Troy at the storage facility, Vinny's men conducting reconnaissance around Wade's house, and other activities that painted a picture of coordinated planning. We've been watching Vincent Torino for months as part of a separate investigation, Morrison said. Imagine our surprise when you appeared in our surveillance photos. Troy studied the images with professional interest. The surveillance had been comprehensive, but not perfect. There were gaps that a good defense attorney could exploit, and the photos themselves were circumstantial at best. Agent Morrison, are you charging me with a crime? Because if not, I think this conversation is over. Morrison gathered up the photos and files. Walk me through it, Mr. Kellerman. The real version. Troy considered his options. Morrison was clearly fishing, trying to get him to volunteer information that the federal investigation hadn't been able to prove conclusively. The smart play was to remain silent and demand a lawyer. But Troy had been thinking about something Mrs. Chun had said in the warehouse. She told me you wouldn't leave her alone after she ended things. The elderly woman had been talking about Brenna's fears regarding Wade, but the words applied equally to Morrison's investigation. Sometimes the only way to end a threat was to meet it head on. You want the real version? Troy asked. Here it is. Wade Hartley was a predator who targeted my wife when she was vulnerable. He manipulated her into an affair, involved my son in his deception, and then escalated to stalking and kidnapping when she tried to end things. Your federal investigation gave him cover to continue his obsessive behavior because you needed him operational for your drug case. Morrison's eyes narrowed. We had no idea about his fixation on your family until... Bullshit. Troy's voice cut through Morrison's protest like a blade. You had surveillance on Wade for months. You knew about the affair. You knew about his escalating behavior. You knew he was taking photos of my wife and son and planning something that was way outside the scope of your drug investigation. But you let it continue because Wade was useful to you. The accusation hung in the air between them, and Troy could see from Morrison's expression that he'd hit close to the mark. So yes, Troy continued, when I realized that federal law enforcement wasn't going to protect my family from your confidential informant, I made other arrangements. I called Vincent Torino because I needed professional advice about how to handle a threat that was escalating beyond civilian capabilities. And when Wade took an innocent elderly woman hostage and started making threats about explosives, I eliminated that threat using the skills the United States Army taught me. Morrison sat back in his chair. You're admitting to premeditated murder. I'm admitting to protecting my family from a dangerous predator that your investigation enabled and protected. Troy stood up slowly. And unless you're prepared to charge me with a crime, Agent Morrison, this conversation is over. Troy walked toward the door, but Morrison's voice stopped him. Your wife knows. Troy turned around slowly. Knows what? Brenna knows that Wade's death wasn't self-defense during a struggle. She's seen the crime scene photos, read the ME's report. She knows you killed him deliberately. Morrison's smile was cold. She also knows about your phone calls to Vincent Torino, about your stage trip to Boston, about all of it. For the first time since the warehouse incident, Troy felt genuinely surprised. Where is she now? Protective custody, along with your son. They're safe, but they're also trying to process the fact that you're not the man they thought you were. Troy's jaw clenched. I'm exactly the man I've always been, Agent Morrison. I'm a man who protects his family from threats. If that makes me a monster in your book, then we have very different definitions of morality. What happens now? Morrison asked. Troy considered the question carefully. His family's safety had been his primary concern throughout this entire ordeal, but he'd always known that eliminating Wade might come with consequences beyond federal investigation. Brenna's reaction to learning the truth about his actions was a variable he'd calculated but hoped to avoid. Now, Troy said finally, I go home and have a conversation with my wife about what kind of man she married and what kind of life she wants to live going forward. And if she can't accept what you did, Troy's expression was as cold and unforgiving as winter. Then she'll discover that Wade Hartley wasn't the only person in her life who underestimated Troy Kellerman. Morrison stood up abruptly. Are you threatening your wife, Mr. Kellerman? I'm simply observing that people who betray my trust tend to face consequences for their choices. Troy opened the door and paused. Ask Vincent Torino what happened to the last person who thought they could play games with my family and walk away unscathed. Troy left the federal building knowing that Morrison would investigate that threat and discover that there was no record of anyone else meeting an unfortunate end after crossing Troy Kellerman. But the seed of doubt was planted, and sometimes doubt was more effective than certainty. Because the truth was that Troy had never killed anyone before Wade Hartley. But he discovered that he was very, very good at it. And if his wife couldn't accept the man she'd married, she would learn just how good at it he really was. Chapter 8. The Judgment. Troy found Brenna and Cooper at her mother's house in West Hartford, a modest colonial that had always felt like a sanctuary from the complications of adult life. But as he stood on the familiar front porch, Troy realized that there would be no sanctuary from what was coming next. Eleanor Hoffman answered the door, her face a mask of carefully controlled hostility. Troy's mother-in-law had never particularly liked him. Too intense, too secretive about his work, too much like the soldiers she'd grown up around during her father's military career. But now her dislike had crystallized into something harder and more dangerous. She doesn't want to see you, Eleanor said without preamble. That's not her decision to make. Troy's voice was calm, but there was an undertone that made Eleanor step back involuntarily. She's my wife. Cooper is my son. We're going to have a conversation. Troy, please, Eleanor said, her voice pleading now. Just leave them alone. Haven't you done enough damage? Troy studied his mother-in-law's face, noting the fear in her eyes. Morrison had been thorough in briefing Brenna about the federal investigation's findings. The family knew exactly what Troy was capable of, and they were afraid of him. Good. Fear would make the next conversation more honest. Where are they? Troy asked. Eleanor reluctantly led him through the house to the backyard, where Brenna sat on a wooden swing set that Cooper had outgrown years ago. Their son was nowhere to be seen, probably upstairs in his grandmother's guest room, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly become much more complicated. Brenna looked up as Troy approached, and he saw something in her expression that he'd never seen before. Not just fear, but a kind of revulsion that cut deeper than any federal interrogation could have managed. "Hello, Brenna." She didn't respond, just stared at him with those green eyes that had once looked at him with love and now reflected nothing but horror. Troy sat down on the swing next to hers, the chains creaking under his weight. "We need to talk." "About what?" Brenna's voice was barely above a whisper. "About how you murdered Wade in cold blood. About how you've been planning it for days. About how you lied to federal agents and manipulated everyone around you to cover up what you did. About how I eliminated a threat to our family." Brenna laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. A threat? Troy, Wade was in federal custody. The DEA was going to arrest him as soon as they finished their investigation. He was going to prison for years. You didn't need to kill him. Troy turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Wade Hartley kidnapped an innocent elderly woman and threatened to blow up half the East Side. He was obsessed with you to the point of psychosis. Even if he'd gone to prison, he would have gotten out eventually. And when he did, he would have come for you and Cooper again. So you appointed yourself judge and executioner. I appointed myself protector of my family, which is what I've always been, Brenna. The only difference is that now you know what that sometimes requires. Brenna stood up abruptly, pacing away from the swing set. "I don't know who you are. I thought I married a good man, a protector, someone who would keep Cooper and me safe. But not like this. Not by becoming a killer." Troy remained seated, watching his wife struggle with the reality of who he'd always been. "I've been a killer since I was 22 years old, Brenna. The Army taught me how to eliminate threats efficiently and without remorse. My business exists because there are people in this world who understand that sometimes violence is the only solution to certain problems. That's different. That was war. That was exactly the same." Troy's voice hardened. "The only difference is the uniform and the flag. Wade Hartley declared war on our family the moment he decided to stalk you and involve our son in his obsession. I ended that war the way wars are always ended, by destroying the enemy's ability to continue fighting." Brenna stopped pacing and turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Cooper saw the news reports, Troy. He knows that Wade is dead. He's asking questions about what happened, and I don't know what to tell him. Tell him the truth. Tell him that his father protected him from a bad man who wanted to hurt our family. How do I explain that his father is a murderer?" Troy stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a man who had made life and death decisions in situations where hesitation meant death. "You don't get to judge me, Brenna. You don't get to take the moral high ground after you brought this threat into our lives in the first place. Wade Hartley found our family because you opened the door for him. You gave him access to our home, our routine, our son. You created this situation with your affair, and I cleaned up the mess." Brenna's face flushed with anger. "I made a mistake. I had an affair, and I ended it when I realized what I was doing. But that doesn't justify murder. Your mistake almost got Cooper killed," Troy said, his voice rising for the first time. "Your mistake put an innocent elderly woman in the hospital with trauma that she'll never fully recover from. Your mistake brought a drug dealer and would-be kidnapper into our neighborhood. So don't you dare stand there and lecture me about proportional response." They stared at each other across the yard. 13 years of marriage reduced to this moment of absolute judgment. Troy could see Brenna making her decision, weighing her fear of him against her love for their son and her own moral compass. "I want a divorce," she said finally. Troy nodded slowly. "I thought you might. And I want full custody of Cooper. I don't want him around you anymore. I don't want him to think that what you did was acceptable." Now Troy's expression shifted, becoming something cold and predatory that made Brenna take an involuntary step backward. "That's not going to happen," he said quietly. "Troy, you can't." "I can't what?" I can't protect my son from a mother who has such poor judgment that she nearly got him killed. I can't ensure that Cooper grows up understanding that sometimes good men have to do terrible things to protect the people they love. Troy moved closer, and Brenna backed against the house. You seem to be confused about how this is going to work, Brenna. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you're threatening me. Troy's smile was cold as death. And tell them what? That your husband eliminated a threat to your family, and now you're having second thoughts about being married to someone competent enough to keep you safe. He shook his head. Agent Morrison would love to hear that conversation. Brenna's voice was shaking now. What do you want? I want my family back. I want my wife to understand that everything I did was to protect her and our son. And I want Cooper to grow up with a father who will teach him how to be strong enough to handle whatever threatens the people he loves. And if I can't accept that, Troy considered the question with the same methodical approach he'd used to plan Wade's elimination. Brenna was the mother of his child, but she was also a security risk now. She knew too much about his capabilities and his willingness to use them. If she couldn't be trusted to keep the family's secrets, she would have to be managed like any other threat. Then you'll discover that Wade Hartley wasn't the first person to underestimate what I'm willing to do to protect what's mine, Troy said finally. And unlike Wade, you won't get a warning. The threat hung in the air between them, explicit and unmistakable. Brenna understood that her choices had been reduced to two options: accept her husband for what he was, or face the consequences of betraying him. I need time to think, she whispered. Troy nodded. You have until tomorrow morning. But Brenna? He paused at the gate. Cooper comes home with me tonight. Because whatever you decide about our marriage, he's my son, and I protect what's mine. Troy walked back through the house, past Eleanor's terrified face, and climbed the stairs to the guest room where Cooper was hiding. His son looked up from a comic book, his young face still bearing traces of the trauma from recent events. Hey, buddy, Troy said gently. Ready to come home? Cooper nodded and began packing his few belongings. As they prepared to leave, the boy looked up at his father with the kind of direct honesty that only children possessed. Daddy, did you kill the bad man? Troy knelt down to Cooper's eye level, looking into eyes that were so much like his own. Yes, son, I did. Good, Cooper said simply. He was going to hurt Mom and Mrs. Chun. Troy felt something warm and fierce bloom in his chest. His son understood what Brenna couldn't, that some threats could only be ended with finality. As they drove home together, Troy realized that whatever Brenna decided, he'd already won the most important battle. Cooper would grow up knowing that his father was someone who could be counted on to eliminate any threat to their family. And that lesson would serve the boy well in the years to come. Chapter 9. The New Order. 6 months later, Troy stood in the kitchen of his Millbrook Heights home, watching Cooper practice soccer in the backyard. The boy had grown taller over the summer, his movements more confident and assured. The trauma of Wade Hartley's obsession had faded, replaced by the quiet security that came from knowing his father was someone who could handle any threat. Brenna had made her choice, as Troy had known she would. She'd returned home the morning after their conversation at her mother's house, pale and shaken, but resolute. The divorce papers had never been filed. Cooper had never spent another night away from home, and Brenna had never again questioned Troy's methods or judgment. The marriage had changed, of course. The easy intimacy they'd once shared was gone, replaced by something more formal and careful. Brenna no longer looked at Troy with love, but she looked at him with respect and a healthy dose of fear. She understood now that her husband was not a man to be trifled with, betrayed, or underestimated. And that understanding had made their home more peaceful than it had been in years. The doorbell rang, and Troy walked through the house to answer it. Agent Morrison stood on the porch, holding a thick manila envelope, and wearing the expression of a man who'd come to deliver unpleasant news. Agent Morrison, Troy said, opening the door wider. This is unexpected. Mr. Kellerman, I have some news about the Wade Hartley investigation. Troy gestured Morrison into the living room, noting how the federal agent's eyes swept the space with professional interest. The family photos on the mantelpiece had been rearranged. Images of Brenna's affair had been carefully edited from their domestic narrative, leaving only pictures that showed the Kellerman family as a united front. Coffee. Troy asked. No, thank you. This won't take long. Morrison settled into the same chair Wade had occupied during their final conversation. The DEA has officially closed the Wade Hartley case. Self-defense during the protection of a hostage. No charges will be filed. Troy's expression didn't change, but he felt a quiet satisfaction. Morrison had spent months trying to build a case for premeditated murder, but the evidence had never been strong enough to overcome the basic facts. Wade had been an armed kidnapper threatening innocent lives, and Troy had eliminated that threat during a dynamic tactical situation. I appreciate you coming by to let me know personally, Troy said. Morrison opened the manila envelope and pulled out several photographs, surveillance shots showing Troy at various locations around the city over the past 6 months. These are interesting, don't you think? Troy studied the images with professional interest. Morrison's people had been watching him closely, documenting his meetings with clients, his visits to the gun range, his occasional dinners with Vincent Torino. All perfectly legal activities, but the message was clear. The federal government was keeping tabs on Troy Kellerman. Interesting how? Troy asked. 3 of your business clients have reported workplace accidents involving employees who'd been skimming money or threatening to report safety violations to federal regulators. A man who'd been harassing one of your female clients had his car run off the road during an apparent mechanical failure. A drug dealer who'd been operating near Cooper's elementary school overdosed on his own product. Morrison gathered up the photos. Statistically, it's remarkable how many problems seem to resolve themselves around people who've hired your security consulting services. Troy's smile was thin and cold. I provide very thorough security assessments, Agent Morrison. When clients understand the full scope of threats they're facing, they're able to make informed decisions about how to protect themselves. And if those decisions happen to result in the elimination of threats through convenient accidents, I'm not responsible for the choices my clients make after receiving my professional recommendations. Morrison stood up, his frustration evident. You're running a murder-for-hire operation disguised as a security consulting business. I'm running a legitimate business that helps people identify and address security vulnerabilities. Troy's voice remained level and professional. If you have evidence of criminal activity, Agent Morrison, I suggest you file charges. Otherwise, these fishing expeditions are starting to feel like harassment. Morrison walked toward the door, but paused in the hallway. What happened to Wade Hartley changed you, didn't it? You discovered that you enjoyed killing. Troy considered the question honestly. Wade's death had been necessary, but Morrison was right about one thing. Troy had discovered something about himself during that warehouse confrontation. He'd learned that he was exceptionally good at eliminating threats, and that knowledge had opened up new possibilities for his business. What happened to Wade Hartley taught me that some problems require permanent solutions, Troy said finally, and that there are people in this world who are willing to pay for those solutions. And your family? How do they feel about what you've become? Troy glanced toward the kitchen window, where he could see Brenna preparing dinner while keeping one eye on Cooper's soccer practice. His wife moved through her domestic routine with quiet efficiency, no longer the carefree woman he'd married, but someone more careful and aware of the complexities of the world they lived in. My family understands that their safety and security are my primary concerns, Troy said. They understand that I'm someone who can be counted on to handle any threat that emerges. And they understand that loyalty and discretion are rewarded, while betrayal and carelessness have consequences. Morrison shook his head. You've turned your own family into hostages. I've turned my family into people who understand how the world actually works. Troy opened the front door, his message clear that the conversation was over. Good day, Agent Morrison. After Morrison left, Troy returned to the kitchen where Brenna was cutting vegetables for a salad. She looked up as he entered, her expression carefully neutral. What did he want? She asked. To let us know that the Wade Hartley investigation is officially closed. Brenna nodded and returned to her food preparation. Over the past 6 months, she'd learned not to ask too many questions about Troy's business or the various news reports about accidents and overdoses that seemed to cluster around his clients. She'd learned that ignorance was safer than knowledge, and that her husband's protection came with a price that was easier to pay if she didn't examine it too closely. Cooper wants to know if he can have a friend over for dinner this weekend, Brenna said, changing the subject to safer ground. Which friend? Tyler Morrison. His father works for the government. Troy's smile was genuinely amused. Agent Morrison's son? That's interesting. Should I tell Cooper no? Troy considered the request carefully. Having Morrison's child in his home would be an interesting psychological pressure on the federal agent. It would also give Troy an opportunity to observe the Morrison family dynamics and potentially gather intelligence about ongoing federal investigations. Tell Cooper yes, Troy said finally. I think it would be good for him to have friends whose fathers understand the importance of protecting their families. That evening, after Cooper had gone to bed and Brenna had retired to their bedroom, Troy sat in his home office reviewing files for new clients. His business had grown significantly since the Wade Hartley incident, as word spread through certain circles about the thoroughness of his security assessments and the finality of his problem-solving methods. The phone rang, and Troy recognized the number as belonging to a prominent Hartford businessman whose wife had been receiving threatening letters from a former employee. Mr. Kellerman? This is Richard Shun. I believe you know my Aunt Helen. Troy leaned back in his chair, remembering the elderly woman Wade had kidnapped. Hello, Mr. Chun. How is Mrs. Chun doing? Better, thanks to you. She speaks very highly of how you handled that situation. Richard's voice carried the kind of careful respect that came from understanding exactly what Troy was capable of. I have a problem that might benefit from your particular expertise. What kind of problem? The kind that requires a permanent solution. Troy pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. Outside his office window, the neighborhood was quiet and peaceful, full of families who slept safely because men like Troy Kellerman were willing to do what was necessary to maintain order in an increasingly chaotic world. Tell me about it, Troy said, and began planning another solution to another problem. Because that's what he did now. That's what he'd always done, really, but now he did it for profit instead of patriotism. And business was very, very good. In the end, Wade Hartley had given Troy something valuable. The knowledge that he was exceptionally skilled at eliminating threats, and that there were people willing to pay handsomely for those skills. Troy Kellerman had found his true calling, and anyone who threatened what was his would learn, as Wade had learned, that some lessons were permanent. The neighborhood remained peaceful. The family remained protected. And Troy remained exactly what he'd always been, a man who finished what others started, forever and always. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1, The Call. Cameron Riley had always trusted his instincts. 15 years as a forensic accountant had taught him that numbers never lied. But people did, constantly, creatively, and often for the worst reasons imaginable. Tonight, standing in the hospital parking lot at 11:47 p.m., every instinct screamed that something was catastrophically wrong. The call had come 20 minutes earlier. Mr. Riley? This is Tracy Ballard, night nurse on Pediatric Floor 3. You need to come to Memorial Hospital immediately. Please don't tell your wife. Come alone. Cameron had been in his home office, reviewing case files for a corporate fraud investigation. Madeline, his wife of 12 years, was already asleep. Their daughter Sophie had been admitted that morning for what doctors called routine tests. Persistent stomach pain, unexplained bruising, night terrors that had worsened over the past 6 months. He'd taken the stairs 3 at a time to the 3rd floor. The pediatric ward was a ghost town, but yellow police tape blocked the corridor leading to Sophie's room. 2 uniformed officers stood guard. Detective Nathan Boyd, a man Cameron recognized from Financial Crimes Task Force they'd both worked, emerged from the restricted area. Riley. Boyd's face was granite. We need to talk. Conference room. Now. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Cameron followed Boyd down a side hallway. His mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. Car accident involving Madeline? No, she was home. Sophie's condition deteriorating? Then why police? Dr. Edward Hobbs was waiting in the conference room, a slight man in his 50s with trembling hands and the haunted eyes of someone who'd seen something they couldn't unsee. Nurse Ballard stood beside him, arms crossed, jaw set. "Mr. Riley," Dr. Hobbs began, then stopped. Started again. "During Sophie's physical examination this evening, we discovered evidence." "Evidence?" Cameron's voice was steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Tracy Ballard stepped forward. "I've been a pediatric nurse for 18 years. I've seen things that would break your heart, but I know the signs. Your daughter has injuries consistent with prolonged sexual abuse." The words hit Cameron like a sledgehammer to the chest. The room tilted. He gripped the table's edge, forcing himself to breathe, to think, to function. This was a crisis. He solved crises. That's what he did. "How long?" His voice came out strangled. "Based on scarring and the psychological evaluation we conducted," Dr. Hobbs said quietly, "we estimate 6 months to a year, possibly longer." 6 months to a year. While Cameron had been working late. While Madeline had been taking Sophie to her parents' house every weekend. While they'd assumed the nightmares were just childhood anxiety. Detective Boyd opened a folder. "Mr. Riley, I need to ask you some difficult questions. We have to eliminate you as a suspect before. Ask whatever you need." Cameron's mind was already 3 steps ahead. "I want a polygraph. Blood test. Whatever proves it wasn't me. Then I want to know what you need from me to find who did this." Boyd studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "You travel for work?" "Frequently. I'm usually on site for corporate investigations 2 to 3 weeks a month. My wife, Madeline, keeps my travel schedule. She can provide documentation." "Where does Sophie spend most of her time when you're away?" "Home with Madeline, or am I in-laws?" "Madeline's parents, Lowell and Geneva Chambers. They live about 20 minutes from us." Cameron paused. "Sophie's been spending more weekends there recently. Madeline said her father loved having her visit." Something flickered across Boyd's face. The detective exchanged glances with Tracy Ballard. "What?" Cameron demanded. "What is it?" Nurse Ballard sat down across from him. "Mr. Riley, when we conducted Sophie's examination, she was initially unresponsive to questions. Dissociative. But when I asked if she felt safe at home, she said yes. When I asked if anyone had hurt her, she started crying and said, 'Grandpa says it's our special secret.'" The conference room walls seemed to close in. Lowell Chambers, Madeline's father, the man who'd walked his daughter down the aisle at their wedding, who'd held Sophie in the delivery room, tears streaming down his face, who'd insisted on those weekend visits, who'd built a playroom in his basement specifically for Sophie. "I need to see my daughter. She's sedated right now," Dr. Hobbs said. "We thought it best until... I need to see my daughter. Now." Boyd led him to Sophie's room. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, dark hair fanned across the pillow, monitors beeping softly. Cameron's little girl, who loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli, who still asked him to check her closet for monsters before bed. He'd been checking for the wrong monsters. Cameron pulled a chair beside her bed and took her small hand in his. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's here, and I'm going to fix this. I promise you, I'm going to fix everything." Behind him, Detective Boyd's phone buzzed. Cameron heard him step into the hallway, heard the murmured conversation. When Boyd returned, his expression was carefully neutral. "Riley, we need to discuss next steps. Child Protective Services will be here in the morning. They'll want to interview Sophie and my wife." Cameron didn't look away from his daughter. "You'll need to interview Madeline." "Yes. She doesn't know. About her father." It wasn't a question. Cameron had spent 12 years reading Madeline's every expression, every mood. If she'd known, if she'd even suspected, but no. Madeline adored her father. Worshipped him. Always had. "Mr. Riley," Boyd said carefully, "in cases like this, it's not uncommon for family members to have been previous victims. If your wife, then she's repressed it completely." Cameron's jaw tightened, which means when she finds out about Sophie, it's going to destroy her. Or she knew and did nothing. Cameron's head snapped up. "My wife would never. I have to consider all possibilities. You understand that." Cameron understood. He understood that in the next 24 hours, his entire life would implode. His daughter was traumatized. His wife would be either devastated or complicit. His father-in-law was a monster. And nothing would ever be the same. But understanding didn't mean accepting. Cameron Riley had built a career on finding the truth hidden in numbers, on tracing money through complex webs of deception, on exposing secrets people thought they'd buried forever. Lowell Chambers had no idea what was coming. "Detective Boyd," Cameron said quietly, "I'm going to cooperate fully with your investigation. Whatever you need. But I need something from you." "What's that?" "Time. Before you arrest him. Before this becomes public." Cameron's eyes were ice cold. "I need to know everything. Who knew? Who helped? Who looked away? Because I promise you, this goes deeper than one sick old man." Boyd started to object, but Cameron cut him off. "You said yourself, family members are often previous victims. Madeline has a brother, Kirk. Her mother, Geneva, has been married to Lowell for 40 years. You think she didn't know?" Cameron's voice was deadly calm. "This is a family that keeps secrets, detective. And I'm very, very good at uncovering secrets. This is a police matter, Riley. You can't." "Can't what?" "Talk to my wife? Visit my in-laws? Ask questions?" Cameron stood. "I'm not talking about vigilante justice. I'm talking about being a father who wants to know exactly how many people failed his daughter. You run your investigation. I'll run mine. We'll compare notes." Boyd studied him for a long moment. 72 hours. That's all I can give you. After that, we're bringing Lowell Chambers in, and this becomes official. That's all I need. Chapter 2. The Mask. Cameron arrived home at 3 a.m. to find Madeline exactly where he'd left her. Asleep in their bedroom. Her blonde hair spilled across the pillow, face peaceful in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She looked younger than her 34 years, fragile somehow, like porcelain that might shatter at a touch. He stood in the doorway, watching her breathe, and felt a complex knot of emotions. Love, fury, grief, and underneath it all, a creeping suspicion he hated himself for having. Did she know? The question was poison, but he couldn't stop it from spreading. Madeline had grown up in the Chambers household. Lowell's daughter. If the abuse had been happening for 6 months to a year with Sophie, had it happened to Madeline too? And if so, how could she not recognize the signs? How could she keep sending Sophie to that house? Unless she did know. Unless she'd made peace with it somehow, rationalized it, buried it so deep she could pretend it wasn't happening. Cameron forced himself to move, to shower, to lie down beside his wife. When the alarm rang at 6:30 a.m., he was already awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind working through scenarios like chess moves. Madeline stirred, rolled toward him. "Morning," she murmured, kissing his shoulder. "You came to bed late. Case file kept me up." The lie came easily, too easily. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine. I'm going to head to the hospital around 9 to check on Sophie. The doctor said they'd have test results by then." She sat up, stretched. "I talked to my dad yesterday. He's worried about her. Wants a visit this weekend once she's home." Cameron's blood turned to ice. He kept his voice level. "Maybe we should limit visitors for a while. Let her rest." Madeline frowned. "Cameron, he's her grandfather. He adores her." "I know." Cameron got out of bed, heading toward the bathroom before she could see his expression, just thinking she might need quiet time. In the shower, he let the scalding water pound against his shoulders and made his decision. He couldn't tell Madeline, not yet, if she was innocent. And God, he needed her to be innocent. Then the revelation would shatter her. She'd confront her father immediately, destroy any chance of building a complete case, possibly even warn him. And if she wasn't innocent, Cameron couldn't finish that thought. He'd have to lie to his wife, play the concerned husband, smile at family dinners, shake Lowell Chambers' hand while knowing exactly what that hand had done to Sophie. The rage that washed through him was white hot, but Cameron had learned long ago to channel anger into action. Emotion clouded judgment. He needed clarity. By the time he emerged from the bathroom, he'd composed his features into a mask of normalcy. Madeline was getting dressed, talking about her schedule for the day, a meeting with her book club, grocery shopping, then the hospital. "I'll meet you there," Cameron said. "I have a morning call with a client, but I should be done by 11. This was also a lie. His morning would be spent very differently. After Madeline left, Cameron sat in his home office and opened his laptop. 15 years of investigative work had taught him how to dig. He started with public records. Lowell Chambers, age 68, retired insurance executive, married to Geneva Chambers for 41 years. 2 children, Madeline, age 34, and Kirk, age 37. No criminal record. No red flags. A pillar of the community, according to his LinkedIn profile. Board member at First Methodist Church. Volunteer youth baseball coach for 10 years. Youth baseball coach. Cameron's hands clenched. He forced himself to keep typing. He pulled up property records next. The Chambers house had been the family for 3 generations. Before that, Lowell had lived in a house on Maple Street, owned by his parents until their deaths in 1998. Cameron made a note to check that address later. Then he started with social media. Geneva Chambers maintained an active Facebook presence, mostly photos of Sophie, family gatherings, church events. Cameron scrolled back through years of posts, looking for patterns. Sophie appeared regularly at the Chambers house starting about 18 months ago. Before that, visits seemed less frequent. 18 months, right around when the abuse likely started, according to Dr. Hobbs. What had changed 18 months ago? Cameron pulled up his own calendar from that period. He'd taken on the Morrison Industries case, a major fraud investigation that had required him to travel to Denver every week for 3 months. He'd been gone more than usual. Had Lowell been waiting for that opportunity? A text from Detective Boyd interrupted his thoughts. CPS interview with Sophie scheduled for 2 p.m. Thought you should know. Your wife will need to be present. Cameron typed back, I'll tell her. Keep me updated on anything else you find. He had 7 hours before that interview would blow his family apart. 7 hours to gather as much information as possible. Cameron opened a new browser window and typed in a name he'd seen on Geneva's Facebook friends list, Mike Cobb. Mike had gone to high school with Madeline and still lived in their hometown. He was also, according to his profile, a counselor at a youth community center. Cameron didn't believe in coincidences. He picked up his phone and dialed. Mike Cobb, this is Cameron Riley, Madeline's husband. I know this is out of the blue, but I was hoping we could meet for coffee this morning. There's something I need to ask you about Madeline's family. There was a long pause. Then, yeah, I think we should talk. How about the Starbucks on Henderson Street? Say 10 o'clock. I'll be there. Cameron hung up, staring at his phone. Mike hadn't asked why. Hadn't seemed surprised, which meant Mike Cobb knew something about the Chambers family. And Cameron was about to find out what. Chapter 3, The First Thread. Mike Cobb was already at the Starbucks when Cameron arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 untouched coffees in front of him. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, with the wary eyes of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side. Cameron, Mike stood, shook his hand. I ordered you a black coffee. Hope that's okay. It's fine. Thanks for meeting me. They sat. Mike pushed one of the cups across the table, but didn't drink from his own. Before you ask your questions, I need to ask you one. Is Sophie okay? Cameron's poker face slipped. How did you? Because you call me asking about Madeline's family, and in my line of work, that usually means something bad has happened to a kid. Mike's expression was grim, and because I've been waiting for this call for about 15 years. The words hung in the air between them. Tell me, Cameron said. Mike exhaled slowly. Madeline and I were friends in high school. Good friends. She was different back then. Anxious, jumpy. Wouldn't let anyone get too close. Senior year, she started having panic attacks. Bad ones. I found her in the school parking lot one day, hyperventilating, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. What happened? I got her calm enough to talk. She said she couldn't go home. That her father, Mike stopped, rubbed his face. She didn't give me details. Just said her father did things to her. That it had been happening for years. That her brother Kirk knew, but pretended he didn't. That her mother knew, but told her it was her fault for being tempting. Cameron felt sick. What did you do? I took her to the school counselor. Mrs. Patterson. She called CPS, reported it. Madeline gave a full statement, or started to, but then Lowell showed up with his lawyer. By the time they were done, Madeline was recanting everything, saying she'd made it up because she was angry about being grounded. The investigation was dropped. Ow! Cameron's voice was hard. How does a full statement just disappear? Lowell Chambers is a very connected man. Has been for decades. The DA at the time, Oscar Finch, went to college with Lowell. The CPS investigator, Sarah Martinez, her husband worked at the insurance company Lowell ran. I was 17 years old and didn't understand how power worked. By the time I realized what was happening, it was over. And Madeline never spoke to me again. Shut down completely. 6 months later, she left for college on the other side of the state. I heard she changed majors 3 times, went to therapy, met you. Mike finally picked up his coffee, took a long drink. I hope you were good for her, that maybe she'd found a way to move past it. She never told me any of it. Trauma works like that sometimes. The mind protects itself. Or Mike hesitated. Or what? Or she convinced herself it didn't happen, that she really had made it up. That's what Lowell would have told her, over and over. You imagined it. You were confused. It was just normal affection. Gaslighting doesn't just make you doubt reality. It rewrites your memory. Cameron's hands were shaking. He set down his coffee before he spilled it. Sophie, my daughter, she's been spending weekends at their house. Lowell, you did the same thing to her. Mike's eyes closed. God, I'm so sorry. You said Madeline's brother Kirk knew. What about the mother? Geneva? Mike's laugh was bitter. Geneva Chambers is the kind of enabler who should be in prison herself. She knew. She always knew. But Lowell was her meal ticket, her status, her identity. Protecting him meant protecting herself. And Kirk was a victim too, for what I gathered. But he dealt with it differently, by becoming his father's lieutenant. Last I heard, he worked for Lowell's old company, follows in his footsteps. There's a whole cycle there, Cameron. Victims becoming perpetrators, enablers, or both. Cameron pulled out his phone, opened his notes app. I need names. Everyone who knew about the allegations 15 years ago. Everyone who helped cover it up. CPS workers, lawyers, anyone. Mike rattled off names while Cameron typed. Then he added, there was one other person you should know about. Joan Baxter. She worked as a secretary at Lowell's company back in the day. She tried to file a complaint about him, said he was inappropriate with young employees. She was fired within a week. Harassment settlement, NDA, the whole 9 yards. But she might talk to you. Do you have contact information? I can get it. Give me an hour. Mike leaned forward. Cameron, what are you planning? The police are investigating. They're going to arrest Lowell within 72 hours. That's not what I asked. Cameron met his eyes. I'm going to make sure everyone who hurt my daughter, everyone who knew and did nothing, everyone who helped cover this up, I'm going to make sure they all pay. The law will handle what it can handle. The rest. He let the sentence hang. Mike nodded slowly. If you need help, I know people. People who work with abuse survivors. People who understand how these family systems operate. People who wouldn't mind seeing someone like Lowell Chambers get what he deserves. I'll keep that in mind. They exchanged numbers. As Cameron stood to leave, Mike caught his arm. One more thing. Madeline. She's going to be devastated when she remembers. And she will remember. Trauma has a way of surfacing when you're not expecting it. Be gentle with her. None of this is her fault. I know, but as Cameron walked to his car, he couldn't shake the question that had been gnawing at him since last night. Did Madeline really forget? Or did she choose not to remember? And if she chose, did she choose for herself? Or for Sophie too? His phone buzzed. A text from Madeline. At the hospital. Where are you? Doctor says we need to talk. Cameron checked his watch. 11:30. The CPS interview was in 2.5 hours. Time to put on his mask again. He typed back, on my way. Traffic. Be there in 20. Then he made one more call. Detective Boyd? It's Riley. I need you to run background checks on 3 people. Geneva Chambers, Kirk Chambers, and a woman named Joan Baxter. I'll email you what I've found so far. And Boyd, I think this goes a lot deeper than one abuser. I think it's an entire system. I'm listening. The CPS investigation from 15 years ago. The one about Madeline. Someone made it disappear. I want to know who, and I want to know what they got in return. There was a pause. Then Boyd said, You're not just looking for justice for Sophie, are you? You're looking for everyone. Everyone, Cameron confirmed. And I'm going to find them. He hung up and drove toward the hospital, toward his devastated wife and traumatized daughter, toward a conversation that would change everything. The Chambers family had built their house on secrets and silence. Cameron Riley specialized in demolition. Chapter 4, Breaking Point. The hospital conference room felt smaller this time. Cameron sat beside Madeline, their hands clasped together on the table, while Dr. Hobbs and a woman from CPS, a stern-faced professional named Rhonda West, sat across from them. Detective Boyd stood by the door, his expression unreadable. Madeline had been confused when Cameron arrived, wondering why police were present for test results. She'd assumed it was about medication, maybe something serious but treatable. The innocence in her eyes had broken something in Cameron's chest. Dr. Hobbs cleared his throat. "Mrs. Riley, the tests we ran on Sophie weren't just for stomach pain. Based on some concerning signs, we conducted a more thorough examination." "What signs?" Madeline's voice was tight. "What are you talking about?" Rhonda West took over, her tone professional but not unkind. "Mrs. Riley, your daughter has been the victim of sexual abuse. We found physical evidence, and Sophie has confirmed this in her interviews with us." The color drained from Madeline's face. No, that's impossible. Sophie is always with me, or with Cameron, or," she stopped. Turned to Cameron. Tell them it's a mistake." Cameron's throat felt like sandpaper. "Maddie, when Sophie did talk to us," Rhonda West continued gently, "she mentioned that the abuse occurred during visits to her grandfather's house." Madeline stood up so fast her chair toppled backward. "You're lying. My father would never. He loves Sophie. He's not. You're wrong. You're all wrong." "Mrs. Riley, please sit down." Dr. Hobbs started to stand, but Madeline was already backing toward the door. No, I need to call my father. He'll explain. He'll tell you this is all." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Cameron caught her wrist. "Maddie, don't. Let go of me." She jerked away, and for a moment, Cameron saw something flicker in her eyes. Not just denial, but something deeper. Fear. Recognition. A door opening onto memories she'd locked away. Then it was gone, and she was dialing. "Madeline." Cameron's voice was sharp enough to make her freeze. "Look at me. Please." She did. Tears streamed down her face. "I know this is impossible to hear," he said quietly. "I know you can't believe it. But Sophie needs us right now. Both of us. Present and focused. Can you do that?" Madeline's hand holding the phone trembled. "He didn't. He couldn't have. Not my dad. Then we'll figure out the truth together. But first, we need to hear everything." "Okay." After a long moment, Madeline nodded and sat back down. The phone clattered onto the table. Rhonda West continued the briefing. Sophie had disclosed repeated abuse over approximately 9 months. It had started with inappropriate touching, escalated gradually. Lowell had used manipulation, telling Sophie it was their special game, that she was a special girl, that mommy and daddy wouldn't understand. Classic grooming behavior. With each detail, Madeline seemed to shrink into herself. Cameron watched her carefully, saw the exact moment something cracked. Her breathing changed. Her eyes went distant. "Mrs. Riley?" Rhonda West leaned forward. "Are you all right?" "The basement," Madeline whispered. "He has a playroom in the basement. For Sophie. He built it last year." Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "It has a lock. On the outside." Cameron's blood ran cold. "Maddie, he said it was to keep her safe when he was upstairs, so she couldn't wander around and get hurt." Madeline's hands were in her lap, twisting together. "He had the same playroom when I was little. Same lock. He said the same thing." The room went silent. Detective Boyd moved closer. "Mrs. Riley, are you saying—" "I don't remember." The words came out fast, panicked. "I don't. There are gaps. Times I can't recall. My mother said I had an overactive imagination, that I confused dreams with reality, that I made up stories for attention." She looked up at Cameron, and her eyes were the eyes of a terrified child. "But there's this feeling I get when I'm in their house, like I can't breathe, like the walls are closing in. I thought it was just anxiety. I thought—" She broke off, pressing her hands to her mouth. Cameron moved to her side, pulling her against his chest as she started to shake. Over her head, he met Detective Boyd's gaze. Boyd nodded slightly. They both knew what this meant. Madeline wasn't complicit. She was another victim, one who'd buried the trauma so deep she'd convinced herself it never happened. And in doing so, she'd unconsciously delivered her own daughter to the same monster. "I need to see Sophie," Madeline said suddenly, pulling away from Cameron. "Right now. I need to tell her I'm sorry. I need to." "Mrs. Riley," Rhonda West interrupted. "Sophie is very fragile right now. Dr. Hobbs believes she may benefit from seeing you, but needs to be carefully managed. We can't have an emotional." "She's my daughter." Madeline's voice cracked. Please let me see her." Dr. Hobbs and Rhonda West exchanged glances. Finally, the doctor nodded. 5 minutes. But if Sophie shows any distress, you'll need to leave immediately." They led Madeline down the hall. Cameron started to follow, but Boyd caught his arm. "Riley, we need to talk. Now." They stepped into an empty patient room. Boyd pulled out his phone, showed Cameron a series of photos, documents, financial records, property deeds. "I've been digging while you were in that meeting," Boyd said. "Your father-in-law? He's not just some sick old man. He's organized, methodical. That house has been in his family for 3 generations, and I'm finding reports, archived, mostly buried, of complaints going back to his father's era." Cameron's jaw clenched. "How many?" 6 different allegations over 40 years. Different children, different circumstances, but always the same pattern. Allegations made, investigations started, then mysteriously dropped. Money changes hands. Witnesses recant. Evidence disappears. Who helped him? That's the question, isn't it? Boyd swiped to another image, a network diagram he'd been building. The DA's office, CPS, local police, they all have people in Lowell's pocket. It's like a spider web. Touch one strand, and they all protect each other. Then we cut the whole web. Boyd studied him. "This morning, you said you needed 72 hours. I'm thinking you've already got a plan." "I do, but it requires Lowell thinking he's safe. Thinking this is just another problem he can make disappear like all the others." Cameron pulled out his own phone, showed Boyd his notes from the meeting with Mike Cobb. Madeline tried to report him in high school. It went nowhere because he had protection. "I want to know exactly who provided that protection and what leverage he used." "You're thinking blackmail?" "I'm thinking a man who's been getting away with this for 40 years has dirt on everyone who matters. Files, recordings, something. And I want to find it before we bring him in." Boyd's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowned. Speaking of which, Lowell Chambers just called his lawyer. Elias McGraw, one of the best defense attorneys in the state. He's already making noise about harassment, wrongful investigation, protecting his client's rights. He doesn't know about Sophie yet. "No, but he will. Madeline's going to call her family." "Actually," Cameron said slowly, "she's not." Boyd raised an eyebrow. Cameron texted Madeline, "Don't call your parents yet. Please. I'll explain everything, but trust me for now." A moment later, his phone rang. "Madeline." "Cameron, I need to talk to my mother. She needs to know." "Maddie, listen to me. If Geneva knows we're on a Lowell, what do you think happens?" Silence. "Then, she'll protect him, like she always does." "Yes, and evidence will disappear. Witnesses will change their stories. Just like last time." Cameron softened his voice. "I need you to trust me. Give me 48 hours. Don't contact your family. Don't tell anyone what we know. Can you do that?" Another long pause. "What are you planning?" "To make sure he can't hurt anyone ever again. Not Sophie. Not you. Not anyone." "Cameron, do you trust me?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I trust you." "Then let me handle this my way. Stay with Sophie. Be her mother. Let me be the one who goes to war." He hung up and turned back to Boyd. "We got our window. Lowell thinks he's safe because he's always been safe. Let's use that against him." Chapter 5. The Architect's Trap. At 6 p.m., Cameron sat in his home office, surrounded by 3 monitors, 2 burner phones, and enough coffee to fuel a small army. He'd sent Madeline back to the hospital to stay with Sophie overnight, partly for Sophie's comfort, partly because he needed to work without explaining every detail. The first call was to Joan Baxter, whose number Mike Cobb had provided. "Ms. Baxter?" My name is Cameron Riley. I'm calling about Lowell Chambers. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. I signed an NDA. I can't. Your NDA is void if we can prove it was used to cover up criminal activity. And I can prove exactly that. Cameron kept his voice steady. But I'm not calling to violate your agreement. I'm calling to offer you the chance to help put Lowell Chambers in prison for the rest of his life. Silence. Then what do you need? Everything you remember. Names, dates, anyone else who filed complaints. And most importantly, do you know if Lowell kept files on the people who helped him? Of course he did. Joanne's laugh was bitter. That's how he stayed protected. He had dirt on everyone. The DA, his boss at the company, the CPS director. I overheard him on the phone once, talking about insurance. Said he had records in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, account number 847-2219. I wrote it down at the time because I thought I might need it someday. Cameron scribbled the information. Did you ever see what was in it? No, but I heard enough to know it was bad. Photos of a DA with prostitutes. Financial records showing embezzlement by the company VP. Medical records he shouldn't have had. Lowell was a collector, Mr. Riley. He collected secrets like some people collect stamps. And he used them every single time someone got close to exposing him. Cameron thanked her and hung up. The safe deposit box was leverage, but he'd need legal authority to access it, which meant either a warrant, unlikely without already having concrete evidence, or finding another way in. His phone buzzed. A text from Detective Boyd. Found the old CPS investigator for Madeline's case. Sarah Martinez. She's willing to talk. Meeting her at 8 p.m. Want to join? Cameron replied. Send me the address. He had 90 minutes. Time to make another call. Kirk Chambers answered on the third ring. Hello. Kirk, it's Cameron. Cameron Riley. Oh, hey. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? Cameron forced a pleasant tone. Yeah. Actually, I wanted to pick your brain about something. You're in insurance now, right? Like your dad was. Sure am. Following in the old man's footsteps. Kirk sounded proud. Why? You looking for a better policy? Actually, I'm working on a case, corporate fraud investigation. There's an insurance angle I can't quite figure out. Would you have time to meet tomorrow? Maybe we could grab lunch and I could ask some questions. Absolutely. I'm always happy to help family. How about that steakhouse on 5th Street? Say noon. Perfect. Thanks, Kirk. Cameron hung up and allowed himself a cold smile. Kirk had no idea he'd just walked into a trap. The meeting would serve two purposes. Keep Kirk away from Lowell during a critical window, and give Cameron a chance to read the man face to face, to see if Kirk was just another victim who'd chosen the wrong path or a willing accomplice. Either way, Kirk's usefulness will be determined by what Cameron learned tonight from Sarah Martinez. The diner where Boyd had arranged the meeting was nearly empty. Sarah Martinez sat in a corner booth, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and the slumped shoulders of someone carrying years of regret. Mr. Riley. She didn't extend her hand. Detective Boyd explained the situation. I'm sorry about your daughter. Cameron slid into the booth across from her. Tell me about Madeline's case. Sarah wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I was fresh at CPS, idealistic, thought I could make a difference. When Madeline Chambers came forward with allegations against her father, I believed her. Everything she described, the pattern, the grooming, the way her family dismissed her concerns, it was textbook. I documented everything, built what I thought was an airtight case. What happened? Lowell Chambers happened. Sarah's voice hardened. He showed up with his lawyer, Elias McGraw, same one he's using now. And within 24 hours, everything fell apart. My supervisor, Director Aaron Miner, called me into his office. Said the case was being reassessed. That Madeline had a history of lying. That her school counselor said she was prone to exaggeration. None of which was true. None of it. But Director Miner had somehow obtained school records that had been altered to support that narrative. Medical records showing Madeline had been treated for attention-seeking behavior. A statement from Geneva Chambers saying Madeline was angry about being punished and was retaliating against her father. Boyd leaned forward. Who altered the records? I don't know, but I know they were fake because I'd already reviewed the originals. Someone with access to school and medical databases changed them overnight. Cameron's mind raced. That takes serious resources, computer expertise, inside access, or money, Sarah said flatly. Enough money to pay someone with those skills. Did Director Minor benefit financially? Sarah pulled out her phone, showed them photos of documents. 6 months after Madeline's case was closed, Aaron Minor bought a vacation home in Florida. Cash purchase, $380,000. I checked his salary records. There's no way he could afford that on what CPS paid. Cameron photographed the images. Do you still work for CPS? I left 5 years ago. Couldn't stomach it anymore, watching kids slip through the cracks because someone had enough money or power to make cases disappear. Sarah looked directly at Cameron. If you're planning to go after Lowell Chambers, really go after him, you need to understand what you're up against. He's not just one abuser. He's the center of a network. The DA, the police chief, the head of CPS, at least 2 family court judges, they've all benefited from looking the other way. Then we don't go after just him, Cameron said quietly. We go after all of them. Boyd's phone rang. He stepped away to answer it, came back looking grim. That was the lab. DNA results from Sophie's examination are back. Conclusive match to Lowell Chambers. Sarah closed her eyes. Dear God, we need to move now, Boyd said to Cameron. With physical evidence, I can get a warrant for his arrest by morning. No, Cameron stood. Not yet. If we arrest him now, he makes one phone call and everyone in his network activates. Evidence disappears. Witnesses vanish. We get him, maybe, but everyone else walks. So what do you suggest? Cameron turned to Sarah. You said Director Minor still has that vacation home? As far as I know. And the DA for Madeline's case, Oscar Finch, he's still practicing law, right? Semi-retired, but yeah. Has a private practice now. Cameron looked at Boyd. We need to put surveillance on everyone in the network. Phones, emails, movements. Lowell's going to reach out to them when he realizes we're closing in. When he does, we'll have evidence of conspiracy to obstruct justice, tampering with evidence, all of it. Boyd hesitated. That's a lot of resources. I need approval. Then get it. Because right now, Lowell thinks he's untouchable. The moment we arrest him, that changes. But if we make him panic first, if we make him think he needs to activate his insurance policy, he'll lead us straight to everyone involved. How do we make him panic without tipping him off? Cameron smiled, a smile with no warmth in it. Leave that to me. I'm having lunch with his son tomorrow. Time to rattle some cages. Chapter 6, The House of Cards. Cameron arrived at the steakhouse 15 minutes early, securing a booth with a clear view of the entrance. He'd barely slept, spending the night reviewing everything he'd learned, mapping connections, planning his next moves like a chess grandmaster, thinking 10 steps ahead. Kurt Chambers walked in at noon precisely, dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than Cameron spent on clothes in a year. He had his father's build, tall, broad-shouldered, but there was a softness to him that Lowell lacked. A weakness. Cameron. Kirk's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Thanks for meeting me. How's Madeline? And Sophie? They're good. The lie came easily now. Sophie's still in the hospital, but the doctors are optimistic. Oh, I didn't realize she was hospitalized. Madeline didn't mention. It's just precautionary. You know how these things go. Cameron opened his menu. How's work treating you? They made small talk through ordering, through the arrival of drinks. Cameron waited until their food came before shifting gears. Kirk, can I ask you something personal? Sure, shoot. Growing up with your father, was he strict? Kirk's expression flickered. Strict? Yeah, I guess. Dad had high expectations. Wanted us to be successful, make the family proud. Why do you ask? I'm just trying to understand family dynamics. Madeline doesn't talk much about her childhood. Madeline's relationship with Dad has always been complicated. Kirk cut into his steak with more force than necessary. She was his favorite when we were kids. Then they had some kind of falling out in high school. She wouldn't tell me what happened, just left for college and barely came home after that. It hurt Dad, honestly. He always said he didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Cameron watched Kirk's face carefully. The man believed what he was saying, or had convinced himself to believe it. And you? You two were close. Dad and me? Kirk shrugged. He was harder on me. Said boys needed discipline. That he was preparing me for the real world. Looking back, I think he was just old-fashioned. You know how that generation is. Discipline how? Oh, the usual. Chores, early curfews, consequences for bad grades. He never hit us or anything like that. Kurt paused. Well, not me. Madeline might have been different. Girls got different rules. Cameron's grip on his fork tightened. Different how? Just, Dad was more protective of her. Wanted to know where she was, who she was with. Made her spend time with him on weekends, even when she wanted to be with friends. Mom used to say it was because Madeline reminded him of his mother, who died when he was young. That he was just trying to preserve that connection. Or control it, Cameron thought. Aloud, he said, Kirk, I need to tell you something. And I need you to hear me out before you react. Kirk set down his fork. Okay. Sophie's tests at the hospital. They weren't for stomach pain. They found evidence of sexual abuse. Cameron paused, letting it sink in. The DNA matches your father. Kirk's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, anger. That's insane. Dad would never. You're saying this because of whatever happened with Madeline in high school. But that was all a misunderstanding. She admitted she made it up. She didn't make it up. She was forced to recant. Cameron pulled out his phone, showed Kirk the documents Air Martinez had provided. This is the original CPS report. Before it was altered, Kirk stared at the screen, his face draining of color. This can't be real. It is. And I need to know, did you know? Did you ever suspect? No. Kirk pushed back from the table, stood up. You're lying. You're trying to what? Frame him? Destroy the family? I don't know what kind of game you're playing. Kirk, sit down. Cameron's voice was steel. You want to walk out of here? Fine. But then you're an accomplice. Because if you knew and did nothing, that makes you complicit. But if you genuinely didn't know, if you were another one of his victims in a different way, then you have a choice right now. You can help us, or you can go down with him. Kirk sat slowly, his hands shaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But you suspected something was wrong with Madeline. You said she was his favorite, then suddenly she wasn't. You said she tried to report something in high school. You knew something happened. I thought. Kirk's voice cracked. I thought it was just teenage drama. Mom said Madeline was going through a phase that she was acting out. Dad said the same thing. I was 20 years old, starting college. I didn't question it. I should have, but I didn't. Cameron leaned forward. Kirk, I'm going to bring down your father. And everyone who helped him. The question is whether you're going to help me or whether you're going to be collateral damage. What do you want from me? Information. Your father keeps records, insurance files. Do you know where they are? Kirk was silent for a long moment. Then, there's a safe in his study. Combination is Mom's birthday, August 14th, 58. I've seen him put documents in there, but I never looked at what they were. What about a safe deposit box? Yeah, at First National. But I don't have access to that. Does your mother? Kirk nodded slowly. She's on the account. Dad set it up years ago. Said it was for important family documents. Cameron sat back, his mind racing. Geneva Chambers was the key. If they could get her to turn on Lowell to access that safe deposit box, they'd have everything they needed to dismantle the entire network. But Geneva had spent 40 years protecting Lowell. Convincing her to betray him would take something more than evidence. It would take destroying her carefully constructed reality. Kirk, I need you to do something for me. Can you call your mother? Ask her to meet you somewhere public? Tell her you need to talk about family finances or something neutral. Why? Because someone needs to tell her the truth about what her husband has been doing. And it needs to come from her son. Kirk looked at Cameron with haunted eyes. This is going to destroy her. Your father already destroyed her. We're just making her see it. 2 hours later, Cameron and Kirk sat across from Geneva Chambers in a quiet park. She was a small woman in her 60s, perfectly coiffed and dressed, every inch the respectable matriarch. But her eyes were sharp, calculating. Kirk, why did you insist on this meeting? And why is Cameron here? Kirk looked at Cameron, who nodded. Mom, we need to talk about Dad. About what he's done. Geneva's expression didn't change. What your father's done is build a successful life for this family. If you're going to criticize him, he raped Madeline when she was a teenager. The words came out in a rush. And he's been raping Sophie. We have DNA evidence, medical reports, everything. Geneva stood up. I won't listen to this. Your sister was a troubled girl who lied for attention, and I won't have you. Sit down, Mrs. Chambers. Cameron's voice was quiet but carried steel. Because what your son is telling you is the truth. And what happens next depends on whether you continue to protect a predator or whether you finally do the right thing. Geneva remained standing, but something in her posture changed. What do you want from me? The safe deposit box. Access to the files Lowell keeps there. Her face went white. You don't understand what those files contain. The people they implicate. If those come out, then a lot of powerful people go to prison alongside your husband. Good. It will destroy everything. Our reputation, the family. Your family is already destroyed. Cameron stood to face her. Madeline is in a hospital right now, trying to explain to Sophie that the abuse wasn't her fault while simultaneously remembering that it happened to her too. Kurt just found out his entire childhood was a lie. And Sophie is 10 years old, and she'll carry this with her forever. Geneva's hands were shaking. I didn't know about Sophie, but you knew about Madeline. She didn't deny it. The silence was answer enough. You have 48 hours to make a choice, Cameron continued. You can access that safe deposit box, turn over the contents to the police, and testify against everyone involved. In exchange, Detective Boyd can recommend leniency. Or you can stand by your husband, and when this all comes crashing down, and it will, you'll go down with him as an accessory. Geneva sank back onto the bench. He'll kill me. If I betray him, Lowell will. Lowell is going to be in police custody by Monday morning. The only question is whether he's going alone or taking you with him. Kirk moved to his mother's side. Mom, please. Think about Madeline. Think about Sophie. They need you to do the right thing. Geneva covered her face with her hands. For a long moment, she sat there, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. I'll need protection. Witness protection, or something like it. I'll arrange it, Cameron said. And I want immunity. Full immunity. I'll talk to the DA. Geneva pulled a key from her purse. This is for the safe deposit box. Account 847-2219 at First National Bank. There are 3 boxes under that account number. Box A has financial records. Box B has medical files, photographs, recordings. Box C has... She stopped, swallowed hard. Box C has videos. Of children, including Madeline. Cameron felt his stomach turn. Beside him, Kirk made a strangled sound. How long have you known this existed? Cameron asked. 30 years. Geneva's voice was barely a whisper. I found a first box a few months after we married. He caught me looking, told me if I ever left him, if I ever spoke about it, he'd release everything and claim I was involved. That I'd go to prison too. So I stayed. And I pretended. And I convinced myself it was the only way to protect our children. You didn't protect them. You fed them to him. Geneva flinched as if struck. I know. God help me, I know. Cameron took the key. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you'll meet Detective Boyd at the bank. You'll access all 3 boxes and turn everything over. Then you'll give a full statement about everyone Lowell paid off, everyone who helped him, everything you know. And then you'll have to live with what you've done. Every single day for the rest of your life. Geneva nodded, tears streaming down her face. Kirk put his arm around her, looking years older than he had that morning. Cameron walked away, the key burning a hole in his pocket. Tomorrow, the house of cards would collapse. But tonight, he had one more visit to make. It was time to look Lowell Chambers in the eye. Chapter 7. Face to Face. Cameron arrived at the Chambers house at 7 p.m. after calling ahead to make sure Lowell was home. The house looked exactly as it always had, a pristine colonial with manicured lawns, flower boxes in the windows, the picture of suburban respectability. Evil didn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looked like a nice house in a good neighborhood. Lowell answered the door himself, smiling warmly. Cameron, what a pleasant surprise. Come in, come in. Is everything all right? Geneva said Kirk called some kind of family meeting earlier. Cameron stepped inside, his hands in his pockets to keep them from forming fists. We need to talk. Alone. Of course. Geneva's at her book club anyway. Let's go to my study. Lowell led the way down the hall, past family photos on the walls. Madeline and Kirk at various ages, smiling obediently at the camera. Sophie's picture had a place of honor on a side table. The study was exactly what Cameron expected. Leather chairs, mahogany desk, walls lined with books and awards. Lowell settled into his chair behind the desk, gesturing for Cameron to sit. Cameron remained standing. "I'll make this simple," Cameron said. "I know what you did to Sophie. I know what you did to Madeline. I know about the safe deposit boxes, the payoffs, the network of people you've corrupted to protect yourself. And I know it all ends tomorrow." Lowell's expression didn't change for a long moment. Then he smiled, a cold, calculated smile that held no warmth. "I see. And you came here to, what? Threaten me? How very dramatic. I came here to look you in the eye, to see if there's any shred of humanity left in you." Humanity. Lowell leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "That's an interesting word, coming from you. Tell me, Cameron, do you know what your biggest weakness is? I wasn't aware we were having that kind of conversation. Your weakness is that you see the world in black and white, good and evil, victims and villains. It makes you predictable." Lowell stood, walked to the window. "You think you're the first person to threaten me? To claim they'll expose everything? I've been handling people like you for 40 years. Not like me." Lowell turned. "No, let me tell you what's going to happen. You'll go to the police with your so-called evidence. My lawyer will tear it apart. Sophie's testimony? The traumatized words of a confused child who loves her grandfather and is being manipulated by her father. Madeline's recovered memories? Notoriously unreliable, especially when she already recanted once as a teenager. Your wife has a history of mental instability. I have the medical records to prove it. Those records are fake. Can you prove that in court? Beyond a reasonable doubt." Lowell's smile widened. "I've been building defenses for decades, Cameron. Every possible attack, every angle, I've planned for it. The people who could testify against me, they're all complicit themselves. They'll never risk their own necks. Geneva is turning over the safe deposit boxes tomorrow." For the first time, something flickered in Lowell's eyes. Surprise, quickly masked. "Geneva would never betray me. She already has. Kirk, too. Your entire family is done protecting you. Then they'll go down with me. Those boxes implicate Geneva. She knew everything, helped facilitate everything. Kirk, too, whether he admits it or not. You think you're saving your family? You're destroying them." Cameron stepped closer. "Here's what you don't understand, Lowell. I don't care about you. You're already finished. What I care about is making sure everyone like you, everyone who helped you, everyone who looked away, they all face consequences. And unlike you, I don't make threats. I deliver results." Big words from a man who's about to lose everything. Lowell walked back to his desk, opened a drawer. Cameron tensed, but Lowell only pulled out a file folder. "Do you know what this is? It's a dossier on you. Your finances, your work history, your marriage. Did you know your wife has been seeing a therapist for the past 2 years? Depression, anxiety, trauma responses she couldn't explain. The therapist's notes are quite detailed. Those are protected by doctor-patient privilege. Nothing is truly protected if you know the right people to ask." Lowell tossed the file on the desk. "I could destroy your career with a few phone calls. Plant evidence of financial impropriety. Have you investigated for fraud? Your precious moral high ground won't matter when you're fighting to stay out of prison yourself." Cameron picked up the file, flipped through it. Then he smiled, a genuine smile that made Lowell's expression falter. "You're bluffing. You've already played this card too many times. The people you've bought, the favors you've called in, they're all documented in those safe deposit boxes, which means they're all about to be exposed. Nobody's going to risk helping you now. Your network is done. You can't. Already did. Right now, Detective Boyd has surveillance on every person in your corrupt little web. The DA, the CPS director, the judges, the lawyers, everyone. The moment you make a call, the moment you try to activate your insurance policy, you prove conspiracy. You prove obstruction of justice. You prove everything we need to put all of you away for the rest of your lives." Lowell's hands clenched on the desk. "You're making a mistake. No, you made the mistake. You hurt my daughter. You hurt my wife. And you thought you'd get away with it because you always have." Cameron leaned over the desk, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But I'm not the police. I'm not CPS. I'm not someone you can buy or threaten. I'm a father, and I'm going to watch you burn. Get out of my house. Gladly. Enjoy your last night of freedom, Lowell, because tomorrow morning it all ends. Cameron walked out, leaving Lowell standing in his study, surrounded by his awards and his secrets and his crumbling kingdom. Outside, Cameron sat in his car for a moment, hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. His phone buzzed. Detective Boyd. Lowell just made 7 phone calls in 3 minutes. We're recording everything. This is it. Cameron typed back. Good. I'll see you at the bank tomorrow morning. Bring backup. Lots of backup. Then he called Madeline. She answered on the first ring. Cameron? Are you okay? I'm fine. I just had a conversation with your father. You what? Cameron? That was dangerous. He could have. He didn't. And tomorrow, this is all over. How's Sophie? Sleeping. She asked about you. Madeline's voice softened. She wants her daddy. I'll be there in 20 minutes. We're going to get through this, Maddie. All of us. Together. I know. Because you won't let us fall. Cameron closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. The trust. The faith. The responsibility. Never, he promised. I will never let you fall. Chapter 8. The Collapse. The next morning, Cameron stood outside First National Bank with Detective Boyd for uniformed officers and 2 FBI agents Boyd had pulled in. At 9 a.m. exactly, Geneva Chambers arrived, looking like she'd aged 10 years overnight. Are you ready? Cameron asked. Geneva nodded mutely and walked into the bank. The manager, a nervous man named Billy Camp, had been briefed on the situation and led them to the vault. Geneva's hands shook as she used the key to access box 847-2219A. The box was full of financial documents, ledgers showing payments to dozens of people over the years. CPS Director Aaron Miner, $50,000 deposited 6 months after Madeline's case was closed. DA Oscar Finch, $75,000, along with photos of him with a prostitute at a hotel. Judge Merle Vance, $100,000 and records of prescription drug use obtained illegally. The list went on. 37 people, all told, who'd taken money or favors from Lowell Chambers in exchange for making problems disappear. Box B contained what Geneva had described. Medical files, photographs, recordings. Evidence of abuse going back 40 years, including files on Madeline, on Sophie, on at least a dozen other children whose names Cameron didn't recognize. One of the FBI agents had to step outside. He came back pale and shaking. Boxy was worse. Much worse. Geneva refused to even look as the FBI agents cataloged the contents. Videos meticulously labeled and dated. Cameron saw Madeline's name and felt bile rise in his throat. We have enough, Boyd said quietly. More than enough. Cameron nodded. Then let's finish this. The arrest happened at noon. 6 police cars descended on the Chambers house, sirens blazing. Lowell answered the door in his bathrobe, coffee in hand, and for just a moment, his mask slipped. Cameron saw raw fear in his eyes. Lowell Chambers, Boyd said, you're under arrest for multiple counts of child sexual abuse, possession of child pornography, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit witness tampering. As they read him his rights and cuffed him, Lowell's eyes found Cameron in the crowd. This isn't over, he hissed. I have resources you can't imagine. Had, Cameron corrected. You had resources, but we seized all your accounts this morning. Froze every asset. Your lawyer? Elias McGraw? He's being arrested right now for helping you obstruct justice. Your network is finished. Lowell's face contorted with rage. You've destroyed everything. No, you destroyed everything. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. They led Lowell away. Cameron watched the police car drive off, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Boyd approached him. We're moving on the others now. Coordinated arrests across the city. By night, everyone in that ledger will be in custody. What about Geneva? Her lawyer is negotiating a plea deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. She'll do time, but not as much as she deserves. Boyd paused. Kirk is cooperating too. He's devastated, but he's helping us identify other potential victims. Cameron nodded. And Sophie? The DA is prioritizing her case. With the physical evidence and Lowell's own recordings, we don't even need her to testify. She won't have to relive it in court. Relief washed over Cameron. Thank you. For everything. Thank you. Cases like this, they're why I became a cop. To protect kids. To stop monsters. Boyd extended his hand. You're a good father, Riley. Your daughter is lucky to have you. Cameron shook his hand, then drove to the hospital. Madeline met him in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. It's really over? She asked. It's over. She collapsed against him, sobbing. Cameron held her while she cried, while she raged, while she grieved for the childhood stolen from her and nearly stolen from their daughter. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. I should have remembered. I should have known. This isn't your fault. None of it is your fault. But I took her there. I let her go to that house. I practically handed her to him. Maddie, stop. Cameron pulled back, looked her in the eyes. He manipulated you. That's what abusers do. They make you doubt yourself, make you forget, make you complicit without your knowledge. But you're a victim, not a villain. And now you're a survivor. We both are. Our whole family is. Madeline wiped her eyes. Sophie wants to see you. Cameron walked into Sophie's room. His daughter looked small in the hospital bed, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. When she saw him, she smiled. Daddy. Cameron sat beside her, took her hand. Hey, sweetheart. How are you feeling? Better. The doctor said I can go home soon. She paused. Mommy told me about Grandpa, that he's going to jail. That's right. Good. Sophie's voice was firm, stronger than Cameron expected. He hurt me, and the nurse said that's not allowed. That nobody's allowed to hurt kids. That's exactly right. And Grandpa is going to be punished for what he did. He can never hurt you again. Or anyone else. Or anyone else. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Then she looked up at Cameron with those big, trusting eyes. Daddy? When we go home, can we maybe not go to Grandpa's house anymore? Cameron felt his heart break and mend simultaneously. We're never going back to that house, sweetheart. I promise. Okay. Sophie yawned. I'm tired. Then sleep. I'll be right here. You promise? I promise. I'm not going anywhere. Sophie closed her eyes, still holding his hand. Within minutes, she was asleep. Madeline stood in the doorway, watching. She's going to be okay, isn't she? She's going to be better than okay, Cameron said. Because she knows we believe her. She knows we protected her. And that's more than either of us had. Madeline came to sit beside him. What happens now? Now? Cameron looked at his sleeping daughter, his traumatized wife, his shattered family that was somehow still standing. Now we heal. Together. And we make sure this never happens to anyone else. How? Cameron smiled. A real smile this time, warm and determined. I've been thinking about that. Sarah Martinez, the CPS investigator, she wants to start a nonprofit for abuse survivors. I'm going to help fund it. Mike Cobb wants to expand his counseling center. I'm going to help with that too. And I'm going to use my skills, my investigative skills, to help other families like ours find justice. That's going to take a lot of time. I have time. I'm cutting back my travel, taking only local cases for the next few years. My family comes first. Always. Madeline leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Cameron Riley. I love you too. Both of you. More than anything. They sat there in the quiet hospital room, two broken people holding each other together, while their daughter slept peacefully for the first time in months. Outside, the sun was setting. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, therapy, court dates, rebuilding trust. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, Cameron Riley felt hope. The monster was caged. The family was safe. And the future, however difficult, belonged to them again. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 6 months later, Cameron stood in the parking lot of the New Horizons Center for Childhood Trauma Recovery, watching volunteers paint the building's exterior. The center had opened 3 weeks ago, funded partially by Cameron's own savings and partially by seized assets from Lowell Chambers' estate. Madeline worked inside as a peer counselor, helping other survivors navigate their own healing journeys. It had been her idea, her way of transforming her pain into purpose. Cameron had never been prouder. His phone rang. Detective Boyd. Riley. Thought you'd want to know. The trial concluded this morning. Guilty on all counts. Cameron exhaled slowly. Sentencing, life without parole, plus another 60 years for the conspiracy charges. Boyd paused. Lowell tried to make a statement. Said he was a victim of circumstance, that everyone had misunderstood his relationship with the children. The judge shut him down, told him he'd heard enough lies. Good. The others are falling like dominoes, too. D.A. Finch got 15 years. Aaron Miner got 12. Judge Vance was disbarred and is facing 10 years. Even Elias McGraw is looking at 5 years for obstruction. In Geneva, 4 years, reduced from 20 because of her cooperation. Kirk got probation and mandatory therapy. He's been helping us identify other victims. There were 11 in total, spanning 3 decades. 11 children. 11 families destroyed. Cameron closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those numbers. How many are getting justice, he asked. All of them. Every single case is being prosecuted. You did this, Riley. You brought down an entire network of corruption. We did it. All of us. After hanging up, Cameron walked inside the center. The lobby was bright and welcoming, designed to be the opposite of institutional. Mike Cobb was there, talking with a group of teenagers. Sarah Martinez ran the administrative side, ensuring every child who came through their doors received the support they needed. Cameron found Madeline in one of the therapy rooms, sitting across from a young woman who looked barely 18. When she saw him, Madeline wrapped up the session and came out. That was the 9th victim, she said quietly. She's been in therapy for years, but never connected her trauma to Lowell. When the news broke, everything clicked. How is she? Angry, scared, relieved, all of it. Madeline took Cameron's hand. But she's talking now. That's progress. They walked outside together. In the courtyard, Sophie played with other children, a supervised playgroup for kids in recovery. She was laughing, genuinely laughing, something Cameron had worried he'd never hear again. Dr. Hobbs says she's doing remarkably well, Madeline said, reading his mind. The nightmares are down to once or twice a week. She's sleeping better, still processing, but healing. And you? Madeline considered the question. I'm getting there. Some days are harder than others. I remember more now, fragments, pieces. My therapist says that's normal, that trauma reveals itself when you're ready to handle it. She squeezed his hand. But I have you. I have Sophie. I have purpose. That helps. Cameron pulled her close. I'm proud of you. You know that, right? What you're doing here, helping others, it's incredible. I learned from the best. She smiled up at him. You taught me that trauma doesn't have to be the end of the story. That we can fight back. That we can win. We did win. Together. A car pulled into the parking lot. Kurt Chambers got out, looking hesitant. He'd been volunteering at the center for the past month, his own form of penance and healing. Madeline had struggled with forgiving him at first, but therapy had helped them both understand that Kirk was another victim of Lowell's manipulation. Cameron, Maddie, Kirk approached. The paint supplies just arrived. Where should I? Storage shed around back, Cameron said. Thanks for helping today. It's the least I can do. Kirk paused. I talked to Mom this morning. Prison is hard on her. It should be, Madeline said, but not unkindly. What she did, what she didn't do, those were choices. I know. I'm not making excuses. Just, she asked about Sophie. If there was any chance. No. Cameron's voice was firm. Sophie knows her grandmother failed her. When she's older, if she wants contact, that'll be her decision. But not now. Kirk nodded. Understand. I'll tell her. After he walked away, Madeline sighed. Do you think he'll ever fully recover? I think he's trying. That's all any of us can do. That evening, Cameron tucked Sophie into bed in her new room. They'd moved houses 3 months ago, a fresh start, away from memories of the old neighborhood and proximity to the Chambers property. The new house was smaller but filled with light, and Sophie had decorated her room with dinosaur posters and glow-in-the-dark stars. Daddy, Sophie said as he pulled the covers up. Yes, sweetheart. At the center today, one of the other kids asked me if I was sad all the time. About what happened. Cameron's heart clenched. What did you tell them? I said I'm sad sometimes, but I'm also happy sometimes. Because you and Mommy kept me safe and Grandpa can't hurt me anymore. She looked up at him with those wise, too old eyes. That's okay, right? To be both. That's more than okay. That's exactly right. Healing isn't about never being sad. It's about knowing the sad parts don't have to be all of you. Like how mommy helps other people now, even though she's still sad sometimes. Exactly like that. Sophie nodded, satisfied. I think when I grow up, I want to help kids too. Like mommy does. Is that weird? Cameron blinked back tears. No, sweetheart. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard. Okay, good. She yawned. Can you check the closet? Cameron did, making a show of looking thoroughly. No monsters. You're safe. I know, but I like when you check anyway. He kissed her forehead. I'll always check. Every single night. I promise. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Sophie. More than you'll ever know. He left her door cracked open, light from the hallway spilling in, and went downstairs where Madeline was waiting with 2 glasses of wine. She okay? Madeline asked. She's more than okay. She's incredible. Cameron took the wine, clinked his glass against hers. We're raising an incredible kid. We are. Madeline curled up next to him on the couch. I got an email today from one of the other victims, the woman who lives in Colorado. She wants to come speak at the center, share her story, help other survivors know they're not alone. That's amazing. It is. This thing we're building, Cameron, it's bigger than us now. It's going to help hundreds of kids, maybe thousands eventually. Cameron looked around their living room at the photos on the walls. Sophie laughing at the beach, Madeline smiling at their wedding, their little family whole and healing. 6 months ago, he'd stood in a hospital conference room and learned his entire world had shattered. Today, he was watching it rebuild into something stronger. We did it, he said softly. We survived. We fought back. We won. We did. Madeline raised her glass. To survival. To justice. To new beginnings. To family, Cameron added. Always to family. They touched glasses, the sound ringing clear in the quiet house. Outside, the sun set on another day. Tomorrow would bring more healing, more work, more challenges. But tonight, the Riley family was safe, together, and whole. And that was enough. Epilogue, 1 year later. The courtroom was packed for Geneva Chambers' parole hearing. She'd served 18 months of her 4-year sentence, and her lawyers were arguing for early release based on good behavior and cooperation. Cameron sat in the gallery with Madeline, Sophie between them. Sophie had wanted to come, to see her grandmother face justice. Her therapist had approved, saying it might help with closure. Geneva looked older, grayer, diminished. When she took the stand, her voice was barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, she said. I fail my daughter. I fail my granddaughter. I failed every child my husband hurt by staying silent. No amount of prison time will change that. The parole board asked questions. Geneva answered honestly, without excuses. She'd enrolled in therapy, joined support groups for families of abusers, started writing letters to her victims. Letters she never sent, but her therapist said helped her process her guilt. When it was time for victim statements, Madeline stood. My mother chose her comfort over my safety, over my daughter's safety, over countless children's safety. She doesn't deserve parole. She deserves to serve every single day of her sentence and more. Sophie tugged Cameron's sleeve. I want to say something. Are you sure? Cameron asked. Sophie nodded. She stood, and the room went quiet. My grandma should stay in prison, Sophie said clearly. Not because I'm mad at her anymore. I am sometimes, but not right now. She should stay because she needs to learn that what she did was really, really wrong. And if she gets out too early, she might not learn. The parole board members looked at each other. The chairman cleared his throat. Thank you, young lady. That's very wise. The decision came quickly. Parole denied. Geneva would serve her full sentence. As I left the